Join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. I would ask the clerk to please call the roll, including council members and staff.
Mayor Pro Tem Gearba,
Here.
Councilmember CO,
Here.
Councilmember Mitchell,
Here.
Councilmember Dillon,
Here.
Councilmember Del Orco,
Here.
Councilmember Mero Sulak,
Here.
Mayor Morrow,
Present.
Interim City Manager Green,
Here.
Wastewater Treatment Plant Superintendent Wygowski,
Here.
City Treasurer Bennett,
She'll be absent.
okay, Police Chief Hart,
Here.
Parks and Rec Director Scruggs. She's here, she's muted. City Engineer Fordyce.
Here.
Very good. A quorum is present. We welcome those who are participating remotely and those who are in council chambers. For those of you who are in council chambers, if you'd please sign in the back to my left. There are also copies of the agenda on the back table along with hearing devices. There is a slightly revised agenda in front of you. The one addition is under the consent portion of tonight's agenda. It's item C-20-158. It's appointment of Councilmember CO to the Saline Police Department Strategic Planning Work Group. It's an issue I emailed you all about earlier today. So if there are no additional amendments, the chair would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as amended. Moved by CO to approve as amended. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Gearbaugh. All those in favor of approving the agenda as amended signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. There are no absences this evening, so we'll proceed with citizen comments on agenda items. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time, make comment or question on an item that appears on this agenda. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record. Are there any citizen comments? And we'll begin with those who are in council chambers this evening. Please, Mrs. Hess.
Thank you, Mary Hess. I was here for the work meeting regarding the sidewalk, and I was wondering if I might be able to add, when we talk about Adian's property, is it possible that if the county comes up with certain criteria, if the city could ask for a variance? Because I know we have variance permissions of asking in the city, and I was wondering if it's conceivable to ask the county for the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Hess. Additional citizen comments on agenda items, please.
Jim Klasinski, 491 East Look. Wanted to just give my comments on the drain issue.
Please.
Because people between my yard and the drain have brought in a lot of dirt in the last couple of years, and this has happened before repeatedly. The water now, after a good rain or a good flood, comes right up to my foundation. A month ago, it was discussed that it doesn't come that far. I sent a video in and I put it on the city's website sometime earlier this summer. It shows there's water all the way up to my foundation, and it's very close to my basement windows. So there, basically, since the drain has never worked very good, it's about 2 or 3 lots down. And over the years, as Mr. Fordyce has noted, people have built things and moved dirt in and different things. Well, he kept it open. He had somebody dig a trench in there about 10, 15 years ago. And new neighbors came in, they dammed it all up, and now the water is really bad. My yard is the worst. It's now the lowest point. I'm draining an area. There's about 10 houses that drain into my backyard right now, and there's nowhere for that water to go. There's an illegal drain, a French drain that goes up to somebody's front yard that actually runs down my driveway, but it doesn't do the job at all, and it doesn't even kick in for the first 24 hours or so, which Mr. Fordyce has witnessed that, and he said that's the nature of French drains. I consider that drain illegal. And I'd like the city to do something about it. The next time my basement might get flooded. And again, I'm at the lowest point. I don't know what to do. I started writing the city about this June of 2019. So this has been going on for quite a while, and I sent in a lot of documentation and pictures. So this is nothing new. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Additional citizen comments from those in attendance this evening. The record will reflect there are none. Clerk Royal, did we receive any comments either via email or any typed in under the chat icon at the bottom of the screen?
No, sir.
No? Okay. We'll give folks just a few more minutes if you'd like to type in a question or concern. Again, please do so at the bottom of your screen under the chat icon, and please indicate that you wish to have this, your comments or concerns publicly expressed during this first public comment period, which again is limited to agenda items only. Okay, the record will reflect we have no additional comments this evening. So we proceed to the first of two presentations, and first up is an Adient property presentation. I'm going to let Mr. Green take the lead on this and introduce our guest representing Adient Incorporated.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Tonight on the call, we have James Vanregard. He's the Executive Director and Associate General Counsel for Adient. And then we also have Ben Graw, who is a consultant for Adient. They are both now co-hosts, and I'll turn it on over to them to give a quick little update.
James, Ben, we welcome you here this evening, and whenever you unmute yourself, you may begin. We appreciate you taking time to provide us an update on the ongoing environmental remediation of the former Johnson Controls, or the former Universal Die-Cast Hoover ball bearing site. Gentlemen, are you with us?
I'm here. This is Ben. I'm deferring to Jay. I'm just going to give him a second to see if he can connect.
I'm sorry, is it Jay or James? If you can catch that.
Oh, Jay, it doesn't look like your mic is working.
Oh, Jay.
And if we can't reach Jay, that's fine, Mike. I mean, I can go ahead if you'd like.
Yeah, I'd say, Ben, if you want to get started, we can try to get Jay when he hops back on.
Okay, all right, yeah. Nothing like some technical difficulties, right? Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Graw. I'm outside environmental counsel for Adient. I want to thank you for the opportunity to give you an update on the 232/290 Monroe Street property. Usually you're hearing from Mike Stolten, a representative from the company Adient. He's no longer with the company. And so Jay Vandy Weingard is sort of the company representative in charge of the site. I've represented Adient for many years on and off this site with a consulting firm called CTI. So I thought I would step in and introduce myself and give you what hopefully is a short update with what has been occurring on the site, both a little bit before the pandemic and kind of during the pandemic, because we have been working out at the site and with EPA and the state, despite the COVID-19 issues. If it's okay, I'd like to share my screen. Is that all right, or is that?
That would be great. Thank you, Ben.
Sure. Let's see. Let's see if I can do this. Sometimes I am not as tech savvy as I would like to be. And
Ben, if you're unable to share your screen, you could always email the information to our interim city manager or city clerk, and we would be happy to disseminate it to my council colleagues.
I could. I will do so. It was not that exciting, honestly, anyway, so I hate to burst any bubbles. It was an old map of the site. I wanted to primarily orient people to the property and some of the comments that I'm going to present here today. But without that graphic, if you don't know the site or aren't familiar with it, those materials will be distributed. So this is a formal industrial site owned and operated for several decades. This was mentioned a moment ago by the Hoover Company. It's about 9.3 acres in size. The operations on the site terminated about 25 years ago, so not much has taken place since about 1985 when Johnson Controls acquired it from Hoover Universal and sort of before Adient spun off of Johnson Controls. So Adient is remediating this site under the federal RCRA program, the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act program, which is only slightly less painful than the CERCLA Superfund program, but very onerous in its remediation requirements. And there's a lot of, I would call, significant input from the state of Michigan with EPA's oversight. So this update, again, I hope to keep it short. It covers two primary focuses within the last year or year and a half, and that is in regard to PFAS and VOCs, or volatile organic compounds, both of which are present on the property itself, and both of which are being investigated and have been investigated. And then after the brief update, I'll kind of highlight some of the issues that I think might be most important to the city. First, in regard to PFAS, some of you may know the state sampled a number of residential wells adjacent to and within about a 500-foot radius of the site back in 2019. The sample results from those wells came back either non-detect or very low concentrations, trace level concentrations of PFAS. And when I say PFAS, I'm talking about the full suite of PFAS chemicals that the state samples for. So that was very good news, right? The state and the Department of Health was very satisfied with that. But there are still PFAS present on the property. So we continue to investigate the scope and the extent of those contaminants on the property itself. One of the things that, hydrogeologically that is playing out for those of you kind of scratching your head and wondering, why is there PFAS present on the property and not showing up in these groundwater wells, is that there is at least two significant clay layers underneath the property, which act as barriers, or what we call aquatards, for the contaminants. That's both good because it keeps the PFAS contamination at a rather shallow depth, so as not to impact those lower aquifers, but also it becomes a bit of a challenge when you want to try and remediate contamination from those soils, which tend to be very compact and difficult to extract. More on that in a little bit. So we're working with EPA and the state of Michigan to investigate both the PFAS on that 232 Monroe property, but also the 290 Monroe property, which is the property just to the south of the river there. And we do have proposals in to the agencies. Those are under consideration. That work will involve some coordination with the city, in particular at the 290 Monroe Street parcel. And, again, without having the graphic in front of me, there is a guardrail that extends along Monroe Street for the extent of the 290 parcel. And our understanding from our technical consultants is that both to access existing groundwater wells on the property itself and to assist with the installation of new groundwater monitoring wells, we may need to remove and replace that guardrail. So something that we will need to coordinate with the city to make sure that is done quickly and safely. Secondly, with regard to the VOCs, the volatile organic compounds, we submitted to EPA, received comments from the state and from EPA, and finalized a soil gas investigation work plan earlier this year, right before sort of everybody started isolating. That work plan was approved and unfortunately wasn't implemented when everything shut down, so it's been put on hold. The long and the short of that investigation work plan is that we are proposing to take soil gas samples along the utility corridor of Monroe Street, kind of immediately adjacent to the 232 property. And that is to assess whether any volatile organic compound vapors have migrated through utility corridors, which sometimes can happen. And so we want to make sure that we know whether that's happening or not. And if it is happening, to what extent is that vapor traveling up gradient, if you will, to perhaps an adjacent property. And if it is, of course, we would assess to what extent it is impacting any adjacent properties, whether it be residential or otherwise, but I believe it's all residential there. Anyway, so that work will begin soon. We are also coordinating with the city to ensure that the work that is going to be conducted within that utility corridor is safe, and that will involve sort of signage and barricades and an assessment of whether flagmen are necessary. And my understanding is that our consultants at CTI have been in touch with the city to understand what's necessary and to coordinate that work. The larger plan for the VOC area, which is kind of just outside of what was the main industrial location of Hoover Universal, we are proposing, and in early discussions with EPA and the state, to define a remedy that would involve an in situ, which means kind of an in the soil chemical oxidation and treatment process, whereby we would reduce the concentrations of the VOCs in the soil without having to do too much dig and haul, which would be the alternative. Not to get too technical, but one of the remedies that people often find in situations like this is something called a soil vapor extraction system. That's not practicable in this case because of that layer of clay that I talked about earlier. So again, while it was beneficial with regard to the PFAS, it's a little frustrating because we can't run an SVE system in that area. So we're working that out with both agencies. And I'll try and wrap this up here and open it up for questions if anybody has questions. But for the city, I think a couple of issues that, again, just to highlight where I think some of this work will impact the city. The work along the utility corridor on Monroe Street for the soil gas investigation, I think that's critical, to understand, make sure that there aren't, any complaints or concerns from neighbors about traffic and things being impacted there. Again, I think CTI is in contact with you all about that. So that's probably further along than I even know. And then the sidewalk, I heard a resident mentioning the sidewalk there a moment ago. That's about a 450-foot stretch, both along the 232 Monroe Street parcel and then south of the bridge there. My understanding is there's a fire hydrant issue there that either it needs to be relocated or moved, or the sidewalk somehow needs to be retrofitted to accommodate the fire hydrant. So we'll have to coordinate with the city, and Mike, probably we need to discuss that with Adient, how we can help and facilitate the development of that sidewalk, which we understand the city would really like to see happen. And then finally, this just came up the other day, but my understanding was there were some concerns by residents over a number of barrels, not many, I think just 3 or 4 barrels that were being stored on the southern portion of the site. And these aren't like, contaminated material barrels. They're just, construction related material just sitting on the site, but they were unsightly. And someone had complained about them. So we're removing those this week. They should be gone by the end of the week. And that's it. I'm sorry if I took up more time than expected.
Ben, thank you very much. This is Mayor Marl. I appreciate your remarks. Appreciate the community update. I'll remind my friends and guests that just 7.5 short years ago, that site, the site that's currently owned by Adient, formerly Universal Die-Cast Hoover Ball Bearing, was, I don't mean to be pejorative, but really a disaster. And it looked quite, well, it was appalling. And because of our policy of constructive engagement and the responsiveness of you and some of your other colleagues, tremendous work has been done on site in the last 7.5 years, tremendous work to remediate and stabilize that parcel. Now, it needs to be stated that much work remains undone, which leads me to my important point of the evening as it relates to this specific topic, which is myself, my colleagues, and all the staff at the City of Saline are eager and willing to support you and your colleagues in any way we can to expeditiously move forward and complete an environmental remediation of this site. It is a quality of life issue. As you noted during your remarks, you're surrounded exclusively by residential properties. There are a number of folks who live within our South Central corridor, and a clean and stable site is in their interest and ultimately in the community's interest. I am glad that you touched on the sidewalk. I don't really have a question pertaining to the sidewalk, other than connectivity in our South Central corridor was discussed at a work meeting earlier this evening beginning at 6 p.m. I would very much like to see a sidewalk on site, whether that be a temporary or permanent one. And so we will have staff follow up with you and your colleagues to see about getting that done. I guess one question before I turn it over to my colleagues, Ben, is from an environmental standpoint, do you see anything problematic with constructing a sidewalk on the westernmost parcel? When you refer to the westernmost parcel, I'm familiar with the proposal along the street. Is there another proposal that maybe I'm missing? No, that would be the same. Okay. We're referring to the same initiative. Yep, sorry. No, short answer, no, I don't think there should be any problem at all. If there's any contaminated soil that's encountered, we would just manage it offsite. Not a big issue at all, I don't think. But certainly something we would want to coordinate with and assist. And very much appreciate your remarks. I will make sure that Adient hears those. It's certainly nice to hear. And kind of build upon the partnership here, because we really do want to get it, sort of knocked out, cleaned up, put back into beneficial use. So it's great to hear. Very good. I have other questions, but for the sake of brevity, I will transition to my colleagues. Again, folks, we will proceed in the same order that we utilized during the work meeting. So I'll begin with Councilman Seo, transition to Mr. Delorco, then move to Gearbaugh, Dillon, Mitchell, and Kamara-Sulak. Mr. Seo, any questions for our guest?
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. Good evening.
Hi.
Did I understand you correctly to say that those barrels will be removed from the site this week?
Yes, I talked to the consultants today, and I previously was unaware of the issue, to be quite honest, but they told me today that someone had expressed concern over the barrels being there. I thought it was more kind of a visual concern. They don't need to be there anyway, so we sort of pressed this, and they confirmed with me today that they would be removed this week.
Very good, because those same people that expressed concern, I guess, to your folks also contacted me. So
Okay, great.
I'd be happy to relay to them that they should be gone by the end of this week. I think
Please.
the concern was more not knowing what was in them, and several of them gotten knocked over too, so.
Okay, thank you for that.
If my memory serves me correctly, several years ago, Adient had talked about having to do some kind of soil removal from the riverbed. Is that not correct?
It's correct that it was probably discussed in terms of options, remedial options. So the brief update I gave you today left out sort of chapters, 3, 4, and 5, which is further down the road. Sediment is certainly going to be further assessed, and there may be some need for sediment removal, but I stress the word may. We just don't know enough about what the contaminant levels are within the sediment. The state and EPA are prioritizing focus at the site, which is very common. Focusing first, of course, on human health and the environment, sort of in a prioritized fashion. PFAS became certainly the top priority within the last couple of years, so that issue floated right to the top. VOCs and any potential for vapor intrusion is always a close second. And then they wanted to better understand what level of contamination may be migrating off of the site, whether that was through runoff historically or through groundwater. To your point about sediment, yes, there is certainly a need or a desire to investigate the sediment. It's off into the future still. We're just not there yet.
All right. And then one last comment, and then I'll pass the gavel, or pass the wand here. I don't know what's in the soil there. I don't know what VOC constitutes necessarily, but the soil can still grow some hellacious weeds. So that the neighbors, I think, would also appreciate if that was seen to with some regular frequency.
I'm glad you mentioned that. One of the challenges, during the pandemic is, I haven't been able to travel. We do have people out to the site on a relative regular basis. I'm not one of them, but I like, and I appreciate. I don't like, but I appreciate hearing from you that there are concerns about how it looks, right? Because that matters to us too. So I'll be sure and talk to Adient about how the property looks to neighboring residents.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Seal. Councilmember Delarico.
Thank you, Mayor Morrow. My first question relates to an issue you were talking about earlier, referencing the clay barriers that kind of serve as a protective measure to trap both the PFAS and the VOCs. Is that correct?
So let me preface this by saying I'm just the lawyer, but the technical consultants that we have identified separate clay layers which have divided hydrologically, sort of layers of a cake, different aquifers. So there's a shallow aquifer, there's an intermediate aquifer, and there's what we call the deep aquifer, deeper aquifer, where, especially the lower deep aquifer, residents would draw groundwater for drinking purposes from. The shallow aquifer seems to have been contained by that first layer of clay. The VOCs, we believe, are present through that, at least in the soil, through that clay layer. And one of the things that, again, I understand technically you cannot do is you cannot draw VOCs out of soil that is so compact,
Right.
similar to clay. So that's my understanding of the technical.
It's through that in situ hybridization method you referred to earlier. Yeah. So roughly speaking, do you know how deep below the surface we're talking about with the aquatards?
Not off the top of my head. I'm sorry, I don't. The first layer I think is relatively shallow, though.
Okay.
We're talking within 5 to 10 feet.
Okay, wow, okay. So being that the soil vapor extraction method is prohibitive in this instance because of the topography and the situation as it exists, what potential other mechanisms of remediation do we have at our disposal to remove both
Sure.
the PFAS and the VOC?
On one end of the spectrum is dig and haul, right? Which we sort of crudely refer to as dig and haul, which is excavation of all of the contaminated soil and disposal as an appropriate federally regulated facility. That is probably the worst option from a cost perspective. You of course, get rid of all the contaminated soil. You just kind of shift it to another location, though, a landfill. The company and EPA and the state are trying to identify a more practical approach to treating the contamination within the soil without having to truck it off and disrupt the whole site. So they're investigating different technologies. The proposal now is both a mixing and a chemical oxidation remedy, and that's currently being considered with EPA.
Okay. So is it safe to imagine that the dig and haul method would also disturb the clay barrier and potentially release the chemicals into the aquifer?
I think there's certainly a risk of that. One of the things that we have been very careful to do, which I've seen at a number of sites like this, is creating pathways or conduits where none existed previously, right? So all the research that we do into understanding both the soil and the contaminants and what's under the ground is to hopefully avoid a situation like that where we don't jump ahead with the remedy only to find out we've created a worse groundwater situation or put more people at risk. So sometimes these things are slow and methodical, and that can be frustrating to people, but we want to do this the right way and not make the problem worse.
I appreciate your answers and your due diligence today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Delorco. Appreciate those questions. Mayor Pro Tem Gearbaugh, any questions or comments for our guest?
Just a couple. What is your intended plan to be, at what level will it be cleaned up? I mean, where do you have it? As an industrial site, as a, whatever else there's available? Is there any answer to that?
It's a great question. I wish I had a good answer or a satisfactory answer for you. I don't think Adient has a long-term development plan for the site. I know they intend to follow through on the RCRA corrective action and clean it up. Typically, these sites are not cleaned up to residential levels.
Right.
And so therefore, the use of the property may seem restricted, but in other cases, I have seen it turned into a park or turned into open space, or there are a lot of other beneficial uses than some kind of development, particularly with a property along a river like this. But I think those are probably questions above my pay grade. Frankly, I mean, just as the lawyer, I don't have any information that I can give you, but I also just don't know what the long-term proposal is. I will say, at a site like this, monitoring can take a while. So whatever happens at that site, there may be groundwater monitoring wells there for a period of time. And that can be a long time, depending on what the agencies require of us. 10, 15 years is not unheard of.
Okay. No, that's similar. We've had those issues with some gas stations in town where then the policies changed and those well monitorings have kind of gone away. It depends on what the state's trying to do and what they want to do.
Okay.
Other than that, I just wanted to also appreciate all the work that ADN has done. That was a site that was completely trashed at one point in time, and we never thought it would get to this point. And the investment and all the money, again, is a helpful benefit to us. And I believe we will continue to work with you and appreciate your talk about the sidewalks.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Gearba. Councilwoman Dillon.
Thank you. I just have a couple of very quick questions. So do you have any kind of a time frame and when you think you're going to reach final remediation?
Unfortunately, no. I think I'd be guessing. It's an educated guess, but I think I would be guessing only because where we are in the sort of a long arc of remediation is close to the beginning, right? I mean, we are still identifying what's at the site, what's present, what's going on in the groundwater. Once we begin implementing remedies, things will move relatively quickly. So once we investigate the soil gas, what we'll do is we'll come up with the soil remediation plan. That'll be a work plan that we submit to EPA. The state will comment on that. We'll move forward with, hopefully, this remedy that we're talking about, the soil mixing and chemical oxidation. Once that remedy is completed, we should be able to shift our attention to the river, to the sediments in the river and any kind of groundwater, surface water interface that's going on there. That could involve long-term monitoring. And when I mentioned 10 to 15 years a moment ago, that's not unlikely. So from what we call case closure, which is receiving a letter from the state that says, yeah, you're absolutely done at this site, I wouldn't expect anything anytime soon. But, and if your question is designed more to when can we get on with this site, right? When can we plant grass out there, or make something, useful of it? It doesn't necessarily need to take that long. You can move to sort of beneficial use projects in advance of case closure. So that's certainly something that I think the company is thinking of, is how can we put this sort of back into good use before closure.
Okay, and that segues me right into my next question, which is, can anything be done on that property prior to final remediation?
Yeah, again, I think the short answer is yes. The long answer, and I'll be very lawyerly, it's just, it depends. It depends on what the state and the EPA require of us as far as the remedy is concerned. So what we're trying to do is identify what we call the source area, right? So the source of the contamination, and address that so that we can kind of walk away from the in situ work. So we can just sort of move into a monitoring phase. A lot of, the people say the solution to pollution is dilution. That is very generally speaking true. So once you treat or remove contaminated soil, residual soil that's there will eventually attenuate to background levels. But of course, you need to monitor that situation. So short answer, yes. Long answer is it's going to depend on the state and EPA and the results of our remedy.
I appreciate that. My last question, and it may have already been asked, I just want to sort of redirect back to it, is that regarding this sidewalk, this potential sidewalk, do you have concerns, does Adient have concerns that disturbing soil at any aspect is going to hinder your process? I mean, is it is it not the right time for that? Is that something that would not be in your scope of desirable projects?
Yeah. Well, I on this issue, I don't think I can speak for Adient, only because I can only represent, what my clients told me. And unfortunately, I don't know that they have any concerns about the sidewalk specifically. I will say that where the sidewalk seems to be proposed is likely in an area where VOC contamination could be present. But sidewalk work is pretty shallow, right? You're not digging down very far. If there's utility-related work or the hydrant work, that may be another story. But again, I think we just need to coordinate with you all on what your desires are, what the city wants to have happen, and how we can help facilitate that. When it comes to this hydrant, I think I need to understand more what the challenge there is. Any kind of deeper subsurface work is likely going to involve, coming into contact with contaminated soil, which of course requires notification to the workers digging in that area. We'll have to coordinate with EPA and the state as well. So as far as a scheduling, from a scheduling perspective, that could add some time.
I appreciate that. One last question for you. Is there any concern about the vegetation on that property, that it is contaminated? Or is it really just the contamination at the ground level?
Yeah, not that I know of. I would be very surprised if any of the vegetation itself is contaminated. I think that tends to be very kind of superficial. I don't know that we've tested any kind of vegetation on the site for contaminants. And my understanding earlier was that it was more kind of a aesthetic issue that people were concerned about, it just looking overrun.
Well, thank you very much for the update, and thank you to Adient for their continued work on this site.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Mitchell.
Thank you, Your Honor. Hi, Mr. Groh. Thank you so much for joining us. I do have a couple of questions for you. You talked earlier about starting the remediation activities, but my understanding is there already have been some on site. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And you're right. I mean, we should acknowledge, and I mean, I'm not sure how much all of you know about the site, but it does have a long, very sort of colorful history here, right? Including litigation and all that fun stuff. There was significant amounts of material removed from the site already, including contaminated rubble and concrete and things like that. So yes, you're correct.
Okay. I want to make sure that was my understanding at our last visit. So I'm really happy to hear we're all on the same page. Now, are you aware that the city has been in discussion to possibly expand the wastewater treatment plant over onto the Adient property?
I did hear that. I'm not aware of any specific proposal. This is coming to me third hand from our consultants. So I don't know more than that. Unfortunately, I'm happy to learn more or discuss that, but I don't know more than that.
Sure. As someone who heard a previous presentation a couple of years ago, I haven't supported that because just hearing you talk about it and the care that would need to be taken. For example, if we're moving soil, is there a concern about soil dispersing into the air, about erosion, or is that not a concern as long as it's hauled away?
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah, generally not. Air emissions can occur depending on the levels of contamination within the soil that you're moving and what those chemicals are, right? So the issue with volatile organic compounds is they can become volatilized and can result in vapor. So you need to be very careful about how you would, work in soils contaminated with VOCs. Typically, though, air emissions are relatively minor from a public health perspective when you're doing excavation type work. But runoff, of course, is a concern, and you need to make sure, especially along a body of water like this, that you're managing that runoff appropriately.
Okay, that helps me. I'm just taking some notes. And there was a sidewalk on the Adient property. I think it was around the 80s. Why was that taken out?
I don't know. It's a good question. The aerial photos that I've seen certainly do show a sidewalk there. I don't know why it was removed, other than when they were removing, I think it was back in 2016, all of the rubble and pavement and parking areas and everything from the site. I believe they wanted to kind of scrape it all clean, if you will. I don't know more about this, but I wanted to kind of get it out there. My understanding with the sidewalk is that it was not ADA compliant at the time, right? And anything that would be constructed, I think the desire would be that it be ADA compliant, which is a little bit wider, right, than your old typical sidewalks. And that may be the reason why there's a fire hydrant issue. But again, I think I'd have to ask the consultants to weigh in on that.
Sure,
yeah.
sure. Would you mind just finding the answer and emailing the city manager to pass along to council, please?
Absolutely.
And then my other question is, I was told that the city had the rights to all of the reports about the content of what is on that site. Is that true?
Sure. Anything that we submit to the EPA or the state, the Eagle agency, is publicly available information, and so it can be hard. A lot of times the agency will create a website that you can just go to and you can download all these different files. I don't know that the state has an active website, mostly because they're not lead agency here, EPA is. And I was on EPA's link a couple of days ago, and it's not great. So if you want documents, they're certainly publicly available, but we'd be happy to forward them along. It would save you a lot of coordination hassle.
Well, it is. And in fact, the city moved forward with doing a sample study on the Adient property, and that added $11,000 to the bill. So that made me a little unhappy, because it was my thinking, just as you're saying, that we do have a right to that information. If it's not readily available from the state or the federal agencies, what is your suggestion to us?
Well, I would have to check with Adient. Anything that we produce as far as a report or a work plan for approval, once it goes to the agencies, it's public information. That's typically how I consider it. And so facilitating your receipt of that information, I don't think we would have any objection to at all. And really, there's nothing else out there. Once we collect data, we just compile it, it goes into a report. So there's no magic there. But we, for legal and confidential reasons, can't give you a draft report, for instance. Right.
Okay, and that's of course what we would want, but that's something that we should by rights be able to get. We should not have had to pay $11,000 for an all new sample process.
Yeah, that's news to me. I am not familiar with that.
Okay, yep, that's one of the unpleasantries that has happened lately. So if there's anything that can be done, we on council were told that the documentation was just not coming from the state or from the feds. So that would be great.
Okay. Yeah, no, please let me know how I can help. I'd be happy to.
We'll definitely be calling you.
Right.
And then my last question, I think you were talking to Ms. Dillon, and you had a concern that where the sidewalk seems to be proposed, that could indeed be a place where these VOCs are in the soil.
Yeah, I think it's unlikely, but yeah, perhaps.
Okay. And then at the same time, at some other point, you said the sidewalk is generally not a deep dig.
Yeah.
So it's less, it might be a risk, but it's less of a risk.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And okay, thank you so much. Those are all my questions. Thank you for tonight.
Oh, thank you.
Councilmember Kamara Sulak to wrap this up.
Yes, thank you. And I appreciate all the information that you're sharing with us tonight, and especially helping us get the information that Ms. Mitchell was just talking about. So I just have a couple other quick things. With regard to the VOCs, there's a big range there. Any idea on how serious the contaminants the VOCs are?
You know, they seem to be relatively localized within the property. And again, I apologize for the lack of visuals. But if you were looking at an aerial shot, they seem to be located kind of in the central northeastern portion of the property, but relatively contained, which is why I think we're hopeful with the soil gas investigation that we're not going to find very much. But, volatile organic compounds are, of a concern any way you slice it. So we'll definitely be focusing on them. EPA, I know, is, and we're all kind of anxious to get through not just the soil gas investigation, but move on to the soil remediation, the remedy.
Okay. Does it benefit Adient to expedite this process? And is it a matter of the steps that you outlaid as far as the plan to the EPA and their approval and all the steps necessary for that 10 to 15 approximate, could be longer, timeline?
I do a lot of these sites all across the country, not just for Adient, but for other multinational companies. And it is a bit frustrating working within the system, right? So the system that we work within is has both a federal overlay and a state overlay. And that can mean multiple different state agencies sort of inputting their opinion on your remedial approach. And that's not by way of complaining. It's trying to explain that it's not always up to us. So Adient does want to move forward and has been trying to move forward. The agencies have jobs to do, right? They have obligations that they need to meet. Their oversight obligations they take very seriously, and we need to respect that. The interplay between the state and the EPA, in particular at this site, has not always been smooth. And there is a lot of back and forth. So I think EPA, to its credit, wants to give the state ample opportunity to provide feedback and to provide comments on remedial approaches, on data that we collect and things like that. So it's a bit of a slow walk through the process, but I wouldn't say that it is any advantage to Adient. If anything, it's a bit frustrating, but we're not really complaining. All right, we need to follow the rules, and as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we do try and approach these things very cautiously and scientifically, so that we're not sort of shooting ourselves in the foot, if you will, from a remediation standpoint. So we want to understand the soil gas, for example, before we move into the VOC remediation on site, so that we don't accidentally, miss an opportunity to coordinate those two efforts, or to exacerbate a problem that we may not know about.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That clarifies it, that you're moving as fast as you can with the sensitivity of the different pollutants and the safety that's requirements. So, is there any chance that these VOCs or anything else can cause odors in the air? That I'm just wondering, since we have so many odor problems for so long with the wastewater treatment plant, just want to throw that out there, if there's any potential that there's odors coming from the site. I'm not aware of any currently occurring at the site. If you're receiving information about current odor issues, please let me know. If you're referring to remediation related odors, I think the answer is yes, depending on what's in the soil, right? So part of this remedy that we're proposing involves mixing soil, so agitating the soil. It's an oxidation process, but it's also moving the soil around, and that sort of necessarily will result in off-gassing, and odors likely are to occur. I think that the goal is to minimize those to the greatest extent possible, but I also think that it would be over a relatively short period of time. So I think it's a great point, and I'm glad you brought it up, because I'm sure at future meetings or as we go forward with this process, we'll want to coordinate with you all to make sure that you're aware of some of those likelihoods. We would really appreciate that. But to your knowledge, at the current time, and maybe even over the last couple of years, are you aware of anything that could kick up any smells, any odors, any stench?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah.
And then, as far as updates on the progress of the site over the next 10, 15, or however many years, will you give us, or will Adient give us updates on the different steps where they're at, or do we need to solicit that directly?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm happy to. I'm happy to come to these meetings and tell you what I know and what we've been up to, and talk about future challenges and coordination. I think that's always good. But I think Mike Stolten was giving these presentations before on behalf of the company. I think I'll leave it up to them, whether you see me again or you see a company representative, or maybe both of us. I'm a big proponent in transparency and participating in these kinds of discussions, because I think the more everybody knows about what we're doing there, just the better it is. So I'll ask Adient what their intent is. But to my knowledge, they've never turned down an opportunity.
All right.
Anything else, Mr. Kamara Sulak?
No, I really appreciate your time and your transparency. You've really enlightened myself, and I imagine my colleagues as well. Thank you, and that's all that I have.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Ben. We appreciate your time this evening. Staff will follow up with you regarding the sidewalk issue, and please convey to your colleagues that when they have something substantive to report, I hope that you'll reach out to either my office or staff, because we would love to have you back and address questions and concerns from council members, and also provide the greater Saline community with an update.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your evening. We appreciate your time. Transitioning now to an update from the Saline Lodging Group LLC. Bill Long, are you with us?
I'm here.
Oh, Bill, bless your heart. Thank you for hanging with us tonight, or hanging tight. I don't know what your schedule looks like this evening, but we'll turn it over to you. I will note for council's benefit that a memorandum was forwarded from the clerk's office from Mr. Long earlier today. If you'd like a paper copy, please connect with the city clerk after tonight's meeting, and she'd be happy to place one in your box. Bill, if you'd like to take maybe 5 to 10 minutes to provide an update, and then we'll do a quick round robin of questions at the conclusion of your remarks.
Sure. This document's a bit over 3 pages. The first page is basically introduction and background on the project. I'm going to assume, since this was distributed, that was read, and in the interest of time, I think I'll skim that very quickly, but just sum up to say that the first 2 years of the project, 2016 and 17, were all about the exploratory stage, a feasibility study, project plan and cost estimates were put together. The LLC was formed, the private placement memorandum was created and was used to support fundraising efforts, which began in 2017 to raise equity capital. 2018, the site on which the hotel is located, as well as the hardware store adjacent to it, was purchased in February. And almost immediately after that, site development and construction work got underway. At the same time, bank construction loan discussions were initiated. So the work that commenced initially was done with equity funds that had been raised at that time. The bank financing had not yet been put in place, and in fact took basically the rest of 2018 to finalize with the First State Bank, who I believe approved the loan late in November. And thanks to the government shutdown that some may recall in December of that year, and some other factors, disbursements were delayed. So the project ran on equity funding pretty much from when the construction and the site development began in 2018 and continued through all of 2018 and into early 2019. 2019, I think bumps in the road began to appear. There was some scope creep on the project. There were some design changes, I understand it. The funding that had been targeted to be raised, which was $3.7 million for equity, had not been completed at that time. And bank funding, although approved, disbursements proved to take quite a bit longer before they were made available. And as a result, the project got into funding difficulties probably in the second quarter of 2018. And those who would be familiar with it would have seen and remember in 2019 work which was pretty active through most of 2018 and early 2019 began to slow down. There was a lot of start-stop activity, get a little money, do a little work, get a little money, which was not the right way to manage a project. And construction, time is money, like most businesses, I suppose, but particularly in the construction business. So the project, I think, began to wobble in 2019. And then in the third and fourth quarters of 2019, very little work was done. Payments to subs began to fall behind, and for all intent and purposes, work came to a near halt by the fourth quarter of 2019. And for anybody paying close attention to it, it probably became evident, or at least there should have been suspicions, would have been suspicions that, hey, there's something very wrong with this project. And things came to a head early in 2020, January and February. Discussions with the builder, Peters Building Company, Jim Hessler, ratcheted up. There were acknowledgments that the schedule that had been previously discussed needed substantial revision, and there were quite some discussions about the funding that had taken place, the spending that had taken place, and whether the budget that had been originally envisioned for the project, which was $9.25 million, was still within sight. And it pretty quickly became apparent that the project was not only way behind schedule, but well over budget. And there were numbers thrown around at the time that it would require up to a total of 14 or 15 million to complete what was originally a $9.25 million budgeted project. So things happened pretty quickly after some of those discussions, in addition to which, in the month of February, First State Bank learned that the project was behind schedule and over budget. They slammed the brakes on, indicated they would no longer disperse funds after February 28th of last year, at which point they had made a total of 5 draws and had released $3.5 million of the $6.3 million construction loan that had been committed. As this began to unravel and news got out, membership, investors in the project gradually learned of the deep or difficult situation it was in, began to collect information about the project, demand updates on the construction status and outlook, the financial situation. And basically by, I think it was the month of April, early April, had taken control of SLG from management, from Jim Heisler and Peters Building, and taken over the business and the project. So in the month of May of this year, the membership agreed to establish a 5-member advisory board. I'm one of those members. I'm a debt investor in the hotel. The other 4 members are equity investors. And the 5 of us have continued to meet weekly and work on trying to oversee the current operations of the hotel and the site, as well as to try to come up with a restructuring plan to save the project and try to keep it in the hands of the current investment group and have local control. So a quick minute just to address the obvious questions that anybody familiar with the project or interested in it has, which is what went wrong. Just to quickly run through those. I think the initial project budget was quite conservative regarding construction costs, and it was insufficiently supported with fixed cost contracts. There were too many of the work streams and trades that had not been supported with fixed cost contracts, but were essentially time and materials. And as time extended, the costs went up. Soft costs, operating expenses, and working capital, I think, were substantially underestimated, probably by at least a factor of half. And, we now project those to be something in the neighborhood of 800,000 combined, in addition to construction costs and furniture, fixture, and equipment costs. It's going to require, we're saying, roughly 800,000 to maintain the site, the facility, and to provide working capital to get it up to positive cash flow to the point where it can service debt. The governance structure was weak. I think it's pretty clear in retrospect that management had far too much delegated authority and too much in the way of decision rights and very little accountability to membership. Those things are a recipe for big problems in my business experience over the years. And it turned out to be the case here. Management in all areas of the project was deficient, in addition to which financial controls, particularly regarding loan disbursements from the bank, were deficient. And I think 2, possibly 3 of the draws that were made from the bank were released directly to the GC, the builder, and not through Saline Lodging Group. And that is a fundamental flaw and has created a number of difficulties. I don't think there's any doubt that the general contractor mismanaged construction, was too involved as a manager in the business overall, and had too much control over the project outside of simply the construction aspects of it. To me, that was a bit of a red flag that the GC was a member of management of the LLC, which is part of the reason why I decided not to make an equity investment and came in as a debt investor for a variety of reasons. I think the construction should not have commenced in advance of the firm funding commitments that ordinarily are needed and sensible to have in place before you kick off a multi-million-dollar project. One thing after closing on the property took place to kick off site development, could be, a case might be made for that, but to get to work on bricks and mortar, I think in retrospect that's regrettable. The funding, both equity and debt for the project, should have been solidified before it got as far along as it did during 2018 or early 2019. And then lastly, under this look back, membership and investors were too removed and were both uninformed and misinformed about the status of the project and the business overall. They should have been provided regular updates, and when they were not forthcoming, I think they should have been demanded. Unfortunately, they weren't. So where does that leave us in terms of current status? As I mentioned earlier, the SLG advisory board's trying to maintain control over the project regarding the operational and financial obligations, dealing with construction liens. There were a total of 5 large construction liens filed. 2 of those have been settled already. There's 2 others that we're likely to have to deal with in the near term, and one is with Tri-County Electric, who is one of the larger investors in the project, and Beth Ann Rentschler, who runs Tri-County, is on the advisory board. So that one is kind of self-managed, if you will. We also have to deal with the business of the First State Bank wanting to exit, and they're pushing down the foreclosure route, which will take several months. So we have some time here, but we have to come up with a plan to take the bank out and buy the paper on the property. And I'll come back to that in a minute or two, as we have some progress on that. In looking at how to move the project forward, we've determined the most cost-effective way to complete construction of the hotel is to do it ourselves, using the relationship we have with Lenawee Construction Consultants, Rick Hobbs, who has done a number of projects in the area over a number of years. I'm very familiar with his work as he's done a number of projects for us in Building D and the Gateway Center that we've been completing the build out of over the last coming up on 2 years now. We think that with Rick as the manager of the construction phase and acting superintendent, we can complete the construction of the hotel itself for around $4.5 million, which is roughly speaking $1 million less than what some other bids that we had for doing the construction work from other general contractors would have required. We estimate the cost for furniture, fixtures, and equipment to be around $1.2 million. That should be a pretty good number. It's been pretty well vetted. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the soft costs for OpEx and working capital, about $800,000. So if you add those three numbers, 4.5, 1, 2, and 800, you're at $6.5 million are the cash costs to complete the construction of the project, equip it with FF&E, and cover the soft costs to get it up to the point where it's generating cash flows sufficient to meet its financial obligations, including debt service. It's a big number, unfortunately. In addition to that, I've skipped, where do we see the $6.5 million coming from? $2.5 million we have earmarked to come from a mezzanine loan through Pace Equity. That discussion is pretty far along. And then $4 million would need to come from new equity, largely from new investors, as the current investment group has indicated a limited appetite to put in additional funds. Not zero, but not anywhere approaching the $4 million that will be needed in addition to the $2.5 million mezz financing. The bank buyout to avoid the foreclosure element will require separate funding, and we have an agreement in principle with a guarantor investor to handle that. That's pretty well along, and I think that's something that in the next several weeks, I think we, with a little bit of luck, will be solidifying. So the key hurdle here is to clear the one around the equity funding, which would probably, truth be told, be challenging under normal circumstances, but as no doubt everyone can imagine, it's been further complicated by this COVID situation that's affecting all our lives and businesses. What are the likely next steps? The buyout of the FSB loan to be negotiated to a hopeful conclusion. As I mentioned, we're pretty far along in a discussion with a guarantor and note holder, potential note holder here. And I think there's a good chance we'll be able to close those discussions out in the coming weeks. The mezzanine loan had been held up pending a property appraisal, which the previous property appraisal had aged to the 2-year mark. So the equity or mezz loan folks wanted a new appraisal. That was completed and just delivered last week. So we can move that along. Closing the mezzanine finance will be required, however, on raising at least 50% of the new membership equity. So they kind of go hand in hand to a certain degree. Obviously need to work on the $4 million. We're considering hosting an open house for the benefit of the community and hopefully to generate some new investor interest in the hotel. We've talked about that for a while and haven't scheduled it yet, but are thinking this would be a positive for the project and the community, and hopefully lead to some financial support. We need to secure support and consents of various stakeholders that will be required to get approval for a final restructuring plan, in addition to the obvious discussions with the bank, the mezzanine folks. We also have to deal with some of the subcontractors who are still owed money, the private note holders who've made loans to the business, including yours truly, and then of course the membership who've invested equity in the project. All these are stakeholders and are going to have to participate in agreeing on probable haircuts that need to take place and how this all comes together. We have been working in recent weeks trying to raise some sufficient funds in the near term to try to do what we call fast-track masonry work on the building exterior, both for aesthetics purposes, to get the brick, the stone, and the ephes that's not yet complete on all four sides of the building. We'd hope to get that complete before the winter sets in, which means it's more cost effective to do when you don't have to provide enclosures and heating. And in addition to the aesthetics benefit, it helps preserve the building. We were close to getting the total that we needed to get this work done, but haven't quite cleared or crossed the finish line on it, but haven't given up on it yet. And without wanting to seem hypocritical to my earlier comments on the history of saying that funding needs to be completed before a major project is undertaken, I still believe that's true with regard to moving beyond the site development work when this project was kicked off. This is a little different, where there's a specific work scope in mind, the exterior of the building, brick, stone, et cetera. And if that could be completed on a specific one-off basis, as we could raise funds, we think this makes sense. And depending upon how successful that effort might be, it could continue. And as a fallback plan to that, we've talked about the concept of treading water through the next 6 months, during which hopefully this whole COVID situation would hopefully be mitigated somewhat, whether through more learnings about it or the potential for vaccines to have been developed and implemented, and that during that time we would also have solved the critical funding hurdle that's needed around the $4 million new capital. And as part of this approach, this tread water approach, if these things took the next balance of this quarter and the first quarter of next year, we'd envision, full speed ahead with construction come April 1st or thereabouts. We'll continue to oversee operations to maintain the site, the building, utilities, insurance, and come up with funding to cover our property taxes, which we're delinquent on at present for the summer tax, while continuing, of course, to work on the larger funding need. We need to make sure we develop and secure membership support to modify the current LLC operating agreement as required, to put in place a new governance structure that will ensure there's adequate control over activities to guarantee that work going forward will be executed in accordance with agreed plans, and that there's no possibility of a repeat of what's happened in the previous couple of years. And that this would need to be done before we would undertake either to spend interim funds, or if we ended up in the tread water mode, we'd obviously need to have this done and in place with effect no later than 1st of April of next year. And then lastly, the group will continue to keep the city officials informed as to future developments and provide updates, as progress is made and there's substantive information that's worthy to provide on a go-forward basis. So that's the update, and happy to take any questions, Mayor, that you or the other council members may have.
Well, Bill, first, thank you. That was very thorough. We appreciate the detailed analysis of where you've been and where you hope to go. As I've expressed previously, it's in the community's interest to see this project complete because we know that a hotel would benefit the community in innumerable ways, not just the revenue and services, but also the jobs that it would create. It's clear from your analysis and report that previously the governance structure, was lacking and deficient. So I'm very pleased that has been resolved and that you and some other really high-quality, committed people are now, essentially dealing with the day-to-day operations of the project. Just a few things, mostly comments. I do think a community open house would be valuable, not only to generate interest in the project, but also to inform community residents and stakeholders as to the status of the project and where you hope to be in the next 2, 4, 6 months. As I mentioned to you before, and as you just addressed, Bill, I do think trying to pay at least a portion of your summer taxes should be a priority for you and your colleagues. I know that a very nominal amount has been paid, but I think paying at least a portion of the summer taxes is a demonstration of good faith and a commitment to move this project forward. Before I turn it over to my colleagues for questions, and I may have asked you this previously, Bill, but from your analysis and from the appraisal that was recently completed, about how much of the construction activity on the hotel is complete? I've heard numbers ranging from about 60 to 70%.
Yeah, I think, I look at it in terms of numbers, and we are saying we need to spend $4.5 million to complete the construction. We need to spend 1.2 on furniture, fixtures, and equipment. And then there's, of course, the soft costs of OpEx and working capital to get it up and functioning as an ongoing cash-generating business. So if you add those up and you get to $6.5 million, with a broad brush, I'd say it's probably more like 40%.
Okay.
But if you're talking construction specific, I think some of the numbers that have been discussed previously in the 60+% range might be in the ballpark.
Okay. Very good. Just curious on that. Well, needless to say, we will. I appreciate your willingness to accept my invitation and present this evening. I think my colleagues and I will take you up on your offer to present in the future when there's something substantive to discuss. And again, keep us in the loop and whatever we can do to be helpful. We want to move this project forward. Certainly mistakes have been made in the past, but we want to be fixated on the future and completing this project and ultimately delivering something that is beneficial to the broader community. So with that, I'll turn it over to my council colleague, Mr. Seo, if you have any questions or comments for Mr. Long.
Thank you, Your Honor. I just wanted to make the comment that I appreciate you bearing your soul and bringing us up to date on where you are, which must be a very painful experience for you and your colleagues. So thank you, sir, for being so forthright, and we wish you Godspeed.
Thank you.
Mr. Dell'Orco.
Thank you, Mayor O'Marl. And thank you, Mr. Long, for a very thorough and informative report of the state of affairs with respect to the hotel. My first question centers on the issue with the contractors. You mentioned that we've settled with a couple of the subs that have been bringing liens against the property, and there were still a few outstanding. Is that something that can be dealt with expeditiously in an effort to facilitate interest in the project from the point of view of the contractors? I'm concerned that the subs, after hearing that people aren't getting paid for work that's already been done, materials that have already been supplied, that there's going to be a lack of interest on behalf of available contractors to carry the project forward?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that while there still are issues to be sorted out with the subs who have past due balances owed them, and 3 of which have liens remaining. I think that it's not uncommon in the construction business to be in a situation where projects get in trouble. You are in a past due situation, and you file liens if you're an active, proactive subcontractor. So I think that on a go-forward basis, we've had discussions with a number of the subs who are owed money, but who would be offered an opportunity to participate in the project when we're in a position to resume it. And I think they understand they're dealing with a different group, and we're not going to commit to get started unless we have funding fully vetted in place and can guarantee that work will be paid as work is performed according to contract. So it's a good question. It's a valid concern, but I think it's one that can be managed and has been pretty well talked through with key subs already.
Well, very good. Thank you for that. And I do apologize. I didn't have a chance to read your memo. It was circulated fairly late in the day, around 5:30, and our first meeting started at 6. So I look forward to going back and reviewing that document for more details. But I'm hoping, I had grave concerns when you mentioned that disbursements from the bank were going directly to the general contractor and the builder. I'm wondering if you could render an opinion on what mechanisms can we implement as a municipality to protect ourselves from this kind of thing moving forward? Because in my mind, that's simply criminal.
Well, I can only speak in the context of a construction project and a real estate project, which this is, and I think that all that needs to happen is that the proper processes and procedures that already exist be followed, and for whatever reason, with regard to 2 and possibly 3 of the 5 disbursements that were made, they weren't. So, sworn statements from the builder go to the title company prepares paperwork, goes to the bank reviews it, asks questions, everything's validated. Funds are supposed to be released either through title company and escrow to the property owner or direct to the property owner after that process is followed, and then dispersed to the general contractor in line with agreements. But in this case, somewhere it broke down, and whether it was with the general contractor and the title company or mistakes and disconnects that occurred between one or the other of those and the bank. I wasn't there at the time. That's been looked at. I think it's still a bit murky and gray as to what took place there, but there are clear procedures that should have been followed that weren't. So to your question about what municipality should need to do so that such events don't happen in the municipality, I'm not sure what the answer to that would be. It's like speed limit, right? There's a sign out there, you read the number and you don't exceed the speed limit or expect difficulty. Well, it's not a heck of a lot different with regard to how things are supposed to work with regard to funding from banks and real estate and construction, but it didn't take place here. in line with, those procedures.
Understood. My last question is related to the lodging group itself. I understand the project was bankrolled to a large extent by members of the community that have a lot of stake in this hotel. And is it true that there are also still current active members within the Celine Lodging Group, that same core group of investors are still part of that group that's trying to salvage the project and move it forward?
Yeah, I will tell you that on the advisory board, you have the second largest equity investor, the third largest equity investor, and the fourth largest equity investor, all active and engaged in the project. Between those three individuals, they provided in excess of, let me just do the quick math here in my head, over 30%, probably a third of the equity capital. So they're active and participating in these weekly meetings and discussions, as are a number of other interested members, investors in the project who've attended various meetings and who receive each week minutes of the meetings that are conducted. So the core group of 20-odd equity investors are all informed and kept appraised with distribution of the weekly minutes of what's taking place. And as I mentioned, those with significant stakes in particular are closest to it and not surprisingly, most active in trying to come up with a plan to save the project and keep it in local control.
Okay. So then, is it a situation where there are a great deal other members that are looking to pull out of the project, much like the situation with the bank, where we're going into foreclosure and we have to buy them out to move forward? Are there any investors that are just so scathed by this project that they're clamoring to be released and take their money and move on with their lives?
Well, I think I doubt there's a single investor, equity or debt investor in the project who, if given an opportunity to be refunded what they put into it, wouldn't jump on it in a New York minute.
Right.
At the same time, there is no surprise, a number of very upset people. There were many more back in April. I think a number have cooled off somewhat. But to the best of my knowledge, I would have been aware of this, no one has formally come forward and asked for the consideration of their ownership stake, be funded or purchased back. The lodging group doesn't have the funds to do it. It doesn't have the funds to complete the project, let alone buy back existing investors' investments. So it's a bit of caught between a rock and a hard place, given that the project on an as-is, where-is basis, the partially finished hotel in this operating environment has very little value as is. The value is created as it's completed and is converted into a cash-generating business. And at that point, there's opportunities to talk about possible buy and sale of ownership stakes in it. But at the present time, it's a pretty hollow discussion, unfortunately.
Okay, Mr. Lung. I'd certainly have more questions, but in the interest of time, I'm gonna yield the floor and say write to you as much as possible to get as much information. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Del Arco. Councilmember Gearbaugh, any questions or comments for our guest?
Mr. Long, I just appreciate your honest and forthright discussion for tonight. I think you'll be moving ahead, and whatever the solution is, you'll find it. And again, appreciate it. And I have no further questions.
Thank you, sir. Councilwoman Dillon, any questions or comments for Mr. Long?
Thank you. Mr. Long, I want to concur with what's already been said and tell you how much I appreciate your candor on coming forth and providing this update of the hotel. It's been long overdue for us in the community, and I appreciate you stepping up to do this at this point. I do have a couple of very quick questions. First, is Best Western still committed to this project?
They are.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, there's been some discussion about possible rebranding using alternative names, but the group is convinced that sticking with Best Western is the best approach, and they have reconfirmed their commitment to it. You can imagine that our situation is not unique in this COVID environment around the country. The hospitality industry has been impacted in a big way. So I imagine they have a number of distressed situations nationwide that this is just one of several they're trying to hold hands on and see it through to a hopeful positive outcome.
Okay, I appreciate that. And then just for clarification, Mr. Junga and his Ace Hardware are separated from the hotel at this point.
Well, there's two issues, three aspects really. There's the common site that was originally acquired from the city back in February 28th, I think it was, of 2018. That site is 7 acres in total. There was a condominium agreement that was put in place between SLG LLC and Sauk Trail Court Properties LLC, which is the owner of, or is Ace Hardware, basically, Jim Junga's business. Subsequently, it was split into two tax parcels. 1.75 acres is the hardware store, 5.25 acres is the hotel. The condo agreement for overseeing the common areas still exists, but they're two separate tax parcels. Jim is running his own project to get his new hardware store up and running. I think his opening date is the 28th of this month, and he's well underway to trying to meet that. The hotel is being managed separately from that. The common area activities, there's discussion around how to move those along in a collaborative way, and no surprise, there's discussions around funding needs. The other thing I'd mention is he was one of the original managers, and although he's no longer a manager, he stepped out of that role. He remains an equity investor in the hotel.
Okay, I appreciate that. And then my last question, Mr. Long, is basically at this time, do you have an ask of the city? Is this just an informational presentation?
It's mainly to provide an update. As the mayor had requested, I thought it would be beneficial for the council and others. But I'd kick myself later if I didn't say, as you've asked, is there anything else? Sure, we'd appreciate any ideas anyone may have who's listening in about how to provide funding for completion of the project. We certainly think it's of great benefit to the community at large, to the local area over there, which is trying to develop. And we'd like to see it kept under local control and management and ownership. But any ideas anyone has about how and where to help source the additional equity funding would be certainly more than welcome.
Okay. And my last question is just, will what is sort of your drop dead deadline for funding before foreclosure, is pursued?
Yeah, that's a tricky one to answer because it depends on a number of different moving parts. What I can say is that if we do nothing and we make no progress on any front, then I think it's probably a pretty good guess that second quarter of next year, and that's a guess. And in this environment with the courts, dockets, and ability to process caseloads affected by COVID, it's a guess. But I think second quarter of next year, that property could, if things were to be just moved in the foreclosure direction and no other progress made, perhaps Q2 of next year, late in Q2, an auction might be taking place to bid and sell the property to the highest bidder through the foreclosure process. But given that we have a discussion underway with this one guarantor investor to take out the bank's position, that buys time. And depending upon what kind of progress we can make on the mezzanine loan financing and the other equity raising, where we do have a number of leads and some significant and substantive interest on the $4 million, I think that we're in pretty good shape. I don't want to assign a probability to success or failure here, but there's a number of things we're working on that I think we as a group are committed to, and we're not doing this because we think failure is imminent. We hope to win here and succeed, and myself and the others are committed to giving that our best effort.
Well, again, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilwoman Dillon. Councilwoman Mitchell, any questions for Mr. Long?
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Long, I just want to say that I do so relate to what's happened. We like to think the best of people, and I'm pretty sure the majority of people have taken a chance and it's not worked out. There's no shame in it not working out. It's really great that you have identified areas that could have been better, and that it sounds like you have a plan moving forward. Ms. Dillon asked a number of the questions I had. One additional question I had is, do you know what federal or state funding might be available because of the whole delay of COVID? Is there anything for you there?
No, we've talked about that on a number of occasions and pretty much have come up dry in terms of specific available sources of funding. I should mention that part of the permanent financing that was to be put in place for the project was on completion, after the construction loan had been dispersed. That was basically to be split into two pieces, one of which would have been kept by the bank and become a commercial mortgage. And then the SBA, Small Business Administration, had made a commitment after the application had been processed back in 2018 to fund roughly half of the $6.3 million and the construction loan. So that's been kind of in a holding pattern given the rest of the situation, but would need to be revisited as well.
Right. So you have not yet talked to the SBA, is that right?
SBA discussions went on hold after FSB pulled the plug on future disbursements back end of February of this year.
Does, I would think that the bank would have some liability for releasing those funds for the contractor. to the contractor instead of the property owner. I want this project to succeed. I really commend you for your transparency, for coming forward and talking about this. I did have the same question as Janet, like, if the city were to help you, what kind of help would that look like? And I'm happy to talk about it and see what needs to be done, because of course we don't want our investment of money into the improvement of the place to go either. But my interest is not just financial. So I guess, I'm happy to come to the open house. I'm happy to talk and further discuss. And we're rooting for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Mitchell. Councilmember Kamara Sulak, any questions for our guest?
Yeah, just a couple real quick. And again, thank you for being forthright. A lot of good detail in the document that you provided. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, did anybody ask about a surety bond? If that would have helped the city protect and the whole process from having any of these delays? Because I guess when you talked about the project commenced before any bank financing, just on some equity funding, that seems like a major problem, just getting off on the wrong on the wrong path to begin with. So can you go into that a little bit more, and what kind of a benefit would a surety bond have provided us?
Well, I don't know whether a surety bond had ever been considered at the front end of this project, or what the cost premium for that would have been. So I can't really speak to that. As far as the funding approach, it was pretty clear in the offering, the confidential offering memorandum that was circulated to investors and shared with the bank, that there was $3.7 million of equity funding that was to be raised. There was $6.25 million of bank financing that was to be raised, or to have access to, which in total was roughly close to $10 million, which would be well in excess of the $9.25 million budget that was put together. But I think the problem was that when the land was bought in February of 2018, the only financing that had been progressed was a portion of the planned equity funding. I can't tell the exact amount because I honestly don't recall, would have to go back and look at it, but it was only a portion, and I think it was under a third at the time. But it was enough to get the ball rolling, and I think the project managers were impatient to get the ball rolling, so they assumed they were going to be able to conclude the remainder of the equity raise and would be able to conclude the bank financing as well. Those assumptions proved to be difficult, and meantime, they were well along not only developing the site, but building bricks and mortar when equity funds ran out and the bank financing hadn't yet been concluded and access to it wasn't yet available.
Wow. Well, thank you for that. And I don't want to dwell on the past at all, but I seem to remember that the Celine Lodging Group was also involved in other hotel construction in the Ann Arbor area. Am I remembering correctly, or? I felt some confidence that, okay, these are seasoned, savvy investors, and construction team?
Yeah, I don't know for a fact. What I am aware of is that, Celine Lodging Group LLC was formed specific for this project. It has no other interest outside of the hotel on Michigan Avenue. I'm not aware that Peters Building or Jim Heisler, head of Peters Building, had any experience in hotel construction outside this one, or any interest in hotel construction. I think the one thing that does click for me on that question is that the general manager of the Celine Lodging Group and the hotel, who would be the hotel operator, Mark Kirkendall, had spent his career in hospitality and had run other hotels in the area, including, I think, one in Ann Arbor. So that might be what you may be making in the connection on.
That could very well be. And thank you. All the other questions that I had have been answered, so I will leave it at that. And thank you again, Mr. Long.
Thank you.
Bill, we thank you again for your time this evening. When we first talked, I had no idea that you'd be here till 9 o'clock, but we did appreciate and enjoy your company this evening, and more importantly, we benefit and the community benefits from such a thorough and detailed analysis of where you've been, but more importantly, where you're going as a group. We do wish you the best, and I'll follow up with you sometime in the next couple weeks, but please use my office and city staff as resources. We're here to help and assist you in any way possible. As many of my colleagues said this evening, we want to see this project to fruition because we understand the benefit to the broader Saline community. So thank you again for your time, Bill.
Thanks for your questions and your support.
Yep. We'll be in touch. Have a good evening. Okay, friends, we're going to move to the consent agenda. The following consent agenda will normally be adopted without discussion. However, at the request of any citizen or council member, any item may be removed from the consent agenda for council discussion.
Move as a,
It's actually moved as amended, Mr. Gearbaugh, because it would include C-20-158. Are you comfortable moving that motion?
Yep.
Okay, it's been moved to approve as amended by Mayor Pro Tem Gearbaugh. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Seal. Hearing no discussion, all those in favor of approving the consent agenda as amended signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, and the motion carries unanimously. We move to new business, item 20-151, ordinance number 819, temporary uses and structure zoning ordinance. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the September 24th, 2020 memo from the Saline Planning Commission and the September 30th, 2020 memo from interim city manager Green, and to approve and adopt or not to approve proposed ordinance number 819, an ordinance to add a new section to 6.16 to the Saline zoning ordinance to allow for temporary uses and structures and the deletion of redundant provisions in section 5.12 and subsections 5.042 regarding the same subject matter.
To acknowledge and
Move to it.
approve.
Moved by Seal to acknowledge and to approve. Was that seconded by Gearbaugh?
Correct.
Very good. Mr. Green, I'm going to start with you, and then I'll transition to Mayor Pro Tem Gearbaugh, who is the council rep on the Planning Commission.
Yes, sir. I'll actually turn it over to City Attorney Forshee as he drafted the ordinances.
I'm sorry, I didn't know that Tom was with us. Tom, good evening.
Hi, good to see you again.
Good to see you. Welcome.
It's been a while.
The floor is yours to discuss your memo regarding proposed ordinance number 819.
Sure. So this was an issue that came up quite some time ago, but it's worked its way through the Code Review Task Force, who's worked carefully to get the language just right. A while ago, there was a concern about transient and seasonal sales, and there were kind of two issues. One was that there was some ambiguity about what constituted a transient seasonal sale, and so there was some question about better defining that and having an ordinance that pertains to it be more clear. And then there was a second issue that kind of dovetailed into this, which was there were quite a few of these sort of pop-up events or temporary events that, you know, we're having trouble tracking them and making sure that that they were run in a way that wasn't a disturbance or a nuisance to neighbors. And so, you know, they kind of dovetailed together about how do we allow for some of these creative business uses, because we also wanted to make sure that if there was some creative temporary type uses that would help a business out on a limited basis, that they could also continue to do that. So it was kind of that balance, but what we landed on was taking the transient and seasonal sales portion, doing a little clarification on that, and then moving it and incorporating it into a temporary use ordinance with some of the other temporary uses. So that it was kind of a one-stop shop. You could just come to this section, and if there was a temporary use, whether that be a transit seasonal sale, garage sale, fundraising activities, grand openings, construction related, like temporary structures that are used. We wanted to kind of consolidate it into one spot. It seemed like a logical thing to do. So we worked on some language that would provide for a permit for these. And so the zoning administrator would have the ability to review these and make sure that, and there's a list in 2B that doesn't conflict with other uses on the site, it's not detrimental to the property or improvements in the surrounding area, does not have adverse effects. Just kind of that check to make sure that the temporary use isn't disrupting or causing a nuisance to surrounding uses. And then it also creates a duration for each one. And that was the subject of a lot of discussion. The Code Review Task Force wanted to give people flexibility enough to do their creative uses, temporary uses, but also wanted to limit them sufficiently so that it wasn't didn't become something that was so common and where it became a nuisance type activity. So if you look on Table A, that really is the consolidation of everything that's in the text, but it lays out which temporary structure or use you're talking about, points to the section. So there might be a few detailed regulations concerning that particular temporary use. Then it talks about how long that use can happen and whether a permit's required or not. And that's really the zoning portion of it. The other two ordinances, which are regulatory in nature, are sort of cleanup items where we went through the code and found that the same subject matter was addressed. And so we wanted this to be the one place you come for it. And so it was a matter of striking out some duplicative regulations. But yeah, it was the Code Review Task Force. They went through it in a very detailed manner, and I think they came out with a good product. So happy to answer any questions.
Very good. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate that analysis. Let me just say from my perspective, as I look at the regulatory burden that exists on the city, my goal, and it's been my goal the last 7.5 years, is to streamline that burden and make our policies and procedures accessible to those we represent. So I think this accomplishes two goals, and I'll be supporting this motion and the subsequent motion. Mr. Gearbaugh, let me turn it over to you as the Planning Commission rep, and then my apologies, I failed to acknowledge Councilmember Dell'Orco, who is our representative on the Code Review Task Force. So Mr. Gearbaugh, after your remarks, if Mr. Dell'Orco would like to add anything from the perspective of the Code Review Task Force, I would welcome that. Mayor Pro Tem Gearbaugh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There wasn't a lot of discussion from planning perspective. They followed the advice that was given to them by the task force. I think the concern was the use and continued use of property where it could become a concern and issue for those that surround it. And then, of course, cleaning up all the aspects that are currently in the ordinances that do not correspond and are conflicting, as Mr. Forsey had already said. There was one vote of no against it, but I would have to defer to Mr. Green if he can remember the reason. I don't believe there was a discussion as to particulars.
No, same here. I don't remember any reason being given.
Okay. And that's really it. I defer to Jim to have more discussion that they had at the code enforcement group for their reasoning and so forth.
Very good. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Gearbaugh. Mr. Delorco, anything you'd like to add, sir?
Not at this time. This all must have been negotiated before I took office and on the Code Review Task Force. I don't recall any discussions pertaining to this particular ordinance. We've spent most of our time working on other issues for the city. Perhaps another Code Review Task Force member would be able to comment more thoroughly, but from reading the ordinance over the weekend and understanding how thorough my colleagues and Mr. Forshee are about these things, I can support this motion as well.
Very good. We'll open up for questions. I assume then that Mr. Delorco has nothing further. Mr. Seo, anything you'd like to add?
Nothing, thank you, Your Honor.
Okay, Mr. Gearbaugh, I assume you're good?
Yes, I am.
Councilwoman Dillon?
Thank you. I have one question, and it's sort of specific, is to food trucks. And I'll go by way of a very specific example. If there's a food truck that parks in a parking lot, like on weekends, is that permitted? Do they now have to follow? They only get 14 days within 1 year? So they would have 7 weekends out of an entire year?
Mayor, answer that?
I believe, Mike, I'm not sure if you know, but we have separate regulations for food trucks?
We do.
Yeah. So these are really, we define transient and seasonal sales, although it is broad, but I think where there's ordinance language that is specific to a particular use, that would be the language that controls. And yeah, I don't see that disturbing the food trucks.
Okay. I think the clerk had a comment.
Yes, our food trucks, they can either do it per time or they can do it for a full year. They have the option.
Okay, I just wasn't sure because the way that this was worded, it sort of sounded like they would be classified as parking lot sales and such, the way that some of the provisions were listed. But if they're separate, then that's fine. My other question is, under the general requirements, is that a decision made by the city, like things like does not conflict with the activities related to the principal uses taking place on the site? So if you're in a strip mall and building A wants to have a sidewalk sale, but it's really kind of blocking business B, who makes that decision? Like, can business B claim that it's a problem, or does that refer back to the city to make the decision?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it ultimately winds up with the zoning administrator. So it's sort of like, when you have a special land use, the planning commission goes through many of these factors, and some of these factors probably look a little familiar to special land use type standards, but aren't creating, aren't detrimental to surrounding uses and other things like that. But in this case, it's just with the zoning administrator, so it doesn't go before the whole planning commission. If a business, for example, has a complaint, of course they could let the zoning administrator, let the city know that there's an issue. Then ultimately they could take that into consideration, give it the weight it deserves, and make a finding under those general requirements.
Okay. And I appreciate that. So then I'm going to move on to Mr. Green. The permit, there's costs associated with getting permits, correct?
Not for this one yet, as noted in the ordinance. A permit and inspection fee will be set by city council. So if you guys approve this tonight, I'll spend the next couple days drafting a permit. And then once Tom gives me the okay, I'll come back to you guys with a fee. But it's going to be probably something very minimal, just like a lot of our other transient ones.
Okay. Well, because I think that's one of the things I have a concern about. I'll be honest, the transient seasonal sales, 45 days is a really long time to have fireworks set up in your neighborhood or Christmas trees for sale. And, you know, if there's not really a benefit to the city to that, is there a reason why we're picking that long of a time frame?
The time frame was discussed by the code review task force. I think I'm trying to remember if the last iteration. I mean, they talked about it in the code review task force quite a bit. You know, making and that is a policy decision, setting that number, whatever that number is. But I think they wanted to, you know, after discussion, they wanted to provide some flexibility for someone to do something, but also try to strike that balance. But that was the number they arrived on after discussion.
Okay, because I guess I'm just really concerned because the way this is written now for transient or seasonal sales, it's 45 days twice a year. So you're talking 90 days. That's 3 months of time in which over the course of a year that you can have some sort of parking lot, you know, sales happening. It just seems really excessive to me. And I'm really struggling with that is what I'll leave it at.
Okay, questions from Councilwoman Mitchell.
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, Mr. Green. Thank you, Mr. DeLorco. I guess my questions aren't for Mr. Forshee in general, or Mr. Forshee in particular, but more in general. So I'm struck by the irony that we have been working with our downtown and we're cutting through red tape. We're trying to help our businesses. And then we're creating a new set of hoops to jump through. I don't know that I'm really prepared to vote on this tonight because, for example, Mr. DeLorco, did you consult with the director of Saline Main Street on any of this?
I apologize, Kristen. I heard your question. I stated previously that this was considered by the Code Review Task Force before I was appointed to the Code Review Task Force. So I wasn't participating in these discussions. They took place before my time.
You did say that. I'm really sorry. I wrote down some questions and I think that didn't make it in on my notes. I'm sorry about that. So who can answer my question? Has the Main Street director been consulted on any of this?
I can touch on that. This draft ordinance started back in October of last year, and the Code Review Task Force finally looked at this version probably back in July and August, then it finally went to planning. Holly has not been part of the conversations the past couple of months, but if she was before that when they originally started bringing this up, I don't know that either.
I don't recall that they were from my recollection.
Right.
I will say that the language the new language is already did exist in the code. So we're as far as the transient seasonal sales part, we're just moving that over to to consolidate some things. And I will say that it does still avoids having someone to get multiple permits. I think that there was a concern that someone would have to get multiple permits to do things. And this still avoids that. And really so the part about transient seasonal sales was moved from a different section to this section. And the additions are just sort of a consolidation and, clarification. So.
Right. I personally would be more comfortable if we had some input, like were there inputs from local business owners on the new parts? Have we talked to anybody who has run a pop-up during this process?
I personally have not. I don't know if any other Code Review Task Force members have, but as Mr. Forshee just mentioned, nothing new is really substantial, just moving stuff around and adding definitions. So everything pretty much in here is pretty much what we already have.
The substance doesn't change, it's just being reconfigured and cleaned up, to my earlier point, so it's more accessible to the people who would be affected by a regulation of this nature.
Right.
The new information is really the duration and just the ability of the city to have and it's administrative, so it's not, you're not going to the planning commission or anything, but to have an administrative look at it to make sure, just to give it that review that it's not going to cause too much heartache to neighbors. So that's basically the new information.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And thank you, Your Honor. So I have a question on the ordinance itself. It's on page 28 of our packet. And for anyone with paper, it's page 1 of the draft ordinance language. Mr. Forshee, under C3, it talks about a tent, and it talks about exceeding 200 square feet. So at this point, we aren't allowing anything over 10 by 20. Is that right?
If without a building permit, I think the building code sets that number 200 square feet as what triggers getting a building permit. So no, it's not saying you can't do it. It's just saying that if the building code requires it for that particular kind of structure, and I don't know off the top of my head exactly what type of structures trigger the 200, but yeah, we're just saying that if the building code is triggered, then you have to get that permit along with this one. There's no really way around that. If we just have to make sure if it triggers the building code, then it's a safety kind of
sure.
Safety issue.
So I've been talking with some people downtown and to other stakeholders about like the little igloos that are on Campus Martius that are used during the winter. So if those don't exceed 200 square feet, it just would be, where would that fit in? Trying to figure that out.
Yeah, I think you'd have to look at the building code because that would probably describe what kind of structure that is. And I'm not really familiar with exactly what it is. If it's like how it's supported, I think that is taken into account how large it is. And that 200 foot is just kind of the trigger point. But then I think the building code would look at how the thing is constructed and whether, what kind of regulations would apply to it.
I mean, I think those are smaller. I think it would not be triggered by the building permit. So that's just a housekeeping thing. Maybe I can talk with you later about it. I feel like if we're reviewing an ordinance, we could have talked to more people and brought more people on board. But I will consider that while other folks are asking questions. Thank you, Your Honor.
Mr. Kamara-Sulek, do you have any questions or comments for staff?
Yes, I do, and thank you for all your work on this. So this may already have been answered, but I was thinking of an example, say like a downtown business that wants a tent type enclosure, say because of the weather and because of the COVID safety measures, and to have more business, say before the winter hits or in the spring, or an awning type covering for a restaurant to maybe get a little bit more seating. How does that fall into this? Does that also go back to what the general code allows, or is this affected with this 45 days or a total of 90 days duration?
I think so. I think the use would have to be looked at, whatever that use is, and if the use is already part of what's already allowed on that parcel, then of course they could just go forth and do what they need to do. This actually provides a little more flexibility that if there's something that's a little out of the ordinary, that's kind of what this is for, so that you can do something temporarily under some controls for a limited amount of time. But if it is something that's like a pop-up that's not associated with the main use on the parcel, then this may be a good use of that. If it's something that's already allowed, of course, they could just go ahead and do that use.
Okay, fair enough. That covers all that I have then. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Kamara Sulek. Let's transition now to the actual motion. Unless there is discussion, we do have a motion on the floor moved by CO, seconded by Gearbaugh to acknowledge receipt, to approve, and to adopt. Is there any additional discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion to acknowledge and to approve and adopt, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Ayes have it. Was that one nay or two? I'm sorry. Who said nay?
I did.
Just one, okay. Thank you, Councilwoman Dillon. Motion carries 6-1. Appreciate that. We transition now to new business item 20-152, ordinance number 820, regulatory ordinance, transient and seasonal sales consistency amendment. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the September 24th, 2020 memo from the Saline Planning Commission to approve and adopt or not approve proposed ordinance number 820, an ordinance to make consistent the regulation of garage sales and business licensing with amendments to the Saline zoning code by deleting subsection 71-49E of chapter 71 blight and amending subsections 22 through 27-8 of chapter 22 businesses of the City of Saline Code of Ordinances. Is there a motion?
Move to acknowledge, approve, and adopt.
It's moved by CO to acknowledge, approve, and adopt. Was that a second by Gearbaugh?
Correct.
Very good. Mr. Green, would you like to begin, or are we transitioning immediately to Attorney Forshee?
This one's pretty straightforward. As Tom kind of mentioned it already, this is a little cleanup for the regulatory side of things as we just adopted the zoning ordinance. So unless Tom has anything to add, we might maybe able to just move to questions.
Mike, there's one, I think I sent an updated. Does your copy say 71-4?
Yes.
Yours does. Okay. Yeah, so this is just a cleanup item. This just eliminates having two sets of rules for the same subject matter. So we just did a search through the code to make sure we weren't having conflicting paragraphs. And we provided a red line, I believe, to show what came out. So.
Yes, you did. Okay, let's open it up for questions for staff or comments. Mr. CO, anything you'd like to add?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Delorco?
Nothing at this time.
Okay. Mayor Pro Tem Gearbaugh?
None.
None. Councilwoman Dillon?
Thank you. So, Mr. Green, can you just clarify, wherever I see a cross-out red line, that is now incorporated as that same text in a different ordinance?
Correct, Tom? Yeah, it just got moved to the ordinance you just approved.
Okay.
Yeah, or it was conflicting, but yeah, it was the same. Some same subject matter was implicated by it.
Okay. And so the one on it would be page 37 of our packet. It's construction trailers. That's living someplace else now? I may have just missed it in the last.
Yes, it is. Let me see here. That is in the zoning, in the table.
Yeah, it would fall under construction-related temporary structures.
Correct. Yep. There you go. 6.163 is where that lives now.
Okay. And so it clearly states that is in regard to trailers also.
Yep, it's defined under the definition part.
Okay.
Construction trailer or construction yard.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Dillon. Councilwoman Mitchell, any questions or comments?
Nope, thank you, Your Honor.
Very good. Mr. Kamara Sulak?
No, this is straightforward. No questions.
Very
Thank you.
good. Well, then if there's no discussion on the motion, and the chair hears none, we do have a motion on the floor moved by CO, seconded by Gearbaugh to acknowledge, to approve, and to adopt. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries 7-0. We move on to new business item 20-144, resolution number 2, Eastlook Drainage Special Assessment. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the September 2020 September 2020 memo from interim manager Green and to approve or not to approve resolution number 2, a determination to make public improvements, approval of plans and estimates of costs, filing of special assessment rolls, notice of hearing. Is there a motion?
Move
Please.
to acknowledge receipt.
Just to acknowledge receipt, Mr. Gearbaugh?
Yeah, at this time.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Seconded by Ms. Dillon. Interim Manager Green, do you want to provide some comments on this?
Yes, sir. We also have Roger Sweats on line too. So when we have questions, feel free to chat with him. So this is just resolution number 2. If you decide to move forward with this East Loop drainage special assessment, the couple things that have changed since last time, as noted, we had to come up with the final cost for this project. So we included construction costs, legal fees, and publishing costs for the public hearing. So it came to a total cost of $25,988. And then the resolution just spells everything else out with the updated roll with everyone that will be charged at the very end.
Very good. Thank you for that, Mr. Green. Mr. Sweats, before we open it up for any questions, any comments you would like to make? And thank you for being with us, Roger.
Yeah, you're welcome. Good evening, everyone. Just the other two things that the resolution does is that it receives the form of the roll, and with there being 10 parcels and that total cost, that means that the assessment to each parcel would be $2,598.80. That's the total principal amount, which would be divided by, I believe it was the 5 years given to the property owners to pay. And so that's being received at this point in time. You're not approving that tonight. You're just receiving it, putting it on file with the clerk. And then the resolution schedules a public hearing for, I believe it was November 9. And so at the November 9 meeting, property owners who are assessed will be able to make their comments on that roll and other issues that they may have with respect to the special assessment. And then at that point in time, the city council would either decide to approve and confirm the roll. The city council could at that time decide to revise the roll, or, at any point in time, the city council can decide it does not want to proceed with this project. So tonight, we're just really receiving it and setting the public hearing.
Very good. Thank you, Roger. We'll begin with questions from the dais. Mr. CEO, any questions for the interim city manager or legal counsel?
No, Your Honor.
Very good. Mr. Delorco.
Thank you, Mayor Marl. As I've articulated in the past with respect to this issue, I feel pretty strongly that as this was studied by Mr. Fordyce and presented to council, it was described as a public solution, and I see no element of a public solution in this proposal other than passing this all entirely on to the taxpayer. And I need some clarification on what it means to just receive it. Is there still an opportunity to lobby effectively for having the city having some skin in the game on this matter if we receive it as is? Or if we receive it as is it simply as is and there is no further room for negotiation on that front?
Let me address that, I guess, in a couple of ways. The city council did decide at the last meeting that the entire amount of the cost of the public improvement would be assessed. So that is a decision that the council has made, subject to the procedures for reconsideration that, of course, could be reconsidered. And then, as I said, so that with respect to what's been done already. With respect to what you might do, even barring reconsideration, if particular council members are not in favor of this, either tonight or at a future point in time, you certainly have the option of voting no and bringing the process to a conclusion. So I think there's a reconsideration avenue, and there is just an avenue to not proceed if that's the council's desire.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Sweats.
Thank you, Mr. Delorco. Mr. Gearbaugh, any questions, comments?
Just a quick one. Mike, can you identify what are the attorney fees and what were the city engineering fees on this in terms of, did you include the staff hours?
The staff hours kind of included Jeff's original markup for this. So that was that $21,000 we discussed before. The attorney fees was $4,500, I believe. Roger, correct me if I'm wrong. And then the remainder is just the fees for the advertising for the public hearing.
So really, the engineering fees we've already absorbed those in-house based on what Jeff's done.
Pretty much, yep.
Yeah, so we already got our skin in the game as part of this.
Yeah, and in addition to the time that I've spent on it in that budget that I prepared, there's some time in there, money in there for surveying and a final design so that we can bid the work out.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fordyce. That's it for me.
Thank you, Mr. Gearbaugh. Councilwoman Dillon, any questions or comments?
Thank you. I do have a couple. So it probably starts with Mr. Sweats. So what happens if after we establish this, the costs are actually higher? Can we adjust that total, or do we have to absorb anything above and beyond?
That's a decision that the city council would have in its discretion to make at the time. If it was the council's desire, you could, upon the final completion of the project, raise the amount of the assessment.
Okay. So there isn't language that you would put in the resolution now that says, that would be inclusive of that? We have to put a fixed dollar amount?
Yeah, you need to put a fixed dollar amount because you're assessing it based on estimates, but to assess it, you do need to provide the property owners with the dollar amount that's being assessed to them. A different way to do this, if the city council wanted to have the exact number, a different way to do this would be for the city to decide to go forward with the project, to pay for it, complete it, and then go through the assessment. But, unless you had very strong feelings about that, that's kind of getting the city out in front. And, without having heard from the property owners, without knowing what kind of objections you're going to receive, without having all the discussion amongst council as to the various different ways council members may see it. I think this is generally probably a better way to do it because you're getting all that out there before you're actually spending the money. And once you've spent it, then it's kind of too late if you've got issues that pop up that you have to deal with. And then the city charter makes very clear that you can assess incremental cost overruns to the property owners. Now, there certainly are legal limits, and if this ended up being instead of $25,000, $75,000 at some point in time, the amount of cost kind of becomes indefensible. But assuming that we're not going to get into that situation, certainly reasonable cost overruns could be assessed in a supplemental assessment to the property owners.
So then we would have to do a whole other round of this to do a supplemental assessment.
You would at a minimum need to have a follow-up resolution. So you would probably want to do it in two resolutions, one that would propose the additional assessment and then one that would confirm it. So it would be more process, but probably a little less process than what we're going through with this 3-resolution process to initially establish the assessment.
But we would also incur even more legal fees in doing that and associated fees.
Yeah, certainly
I guess I'm just trying to figure out on the front end. I know that you're saying we're going to front the money, but theoretically, aren't we fronting the money anyway because we're giving people 5 years to pay it?
Well, yeah, you're fronting the money anyway because you're giving people 5 years to pay it. But if the city would actually just go ahead and do this before confirming the assessments, I'm not. That's different than fronting the money. That is actually spending the money without having everything in place to have the money repaid to the city. So if you would run into obstacles either in developing council consensus or in hearing objections from property owners that would change your mind, you do take the risk then that the city just pays the whole cost without any reimbursement from assessments if there are issues that would come up through the process that would lead you to not confirm the assessment. So I think the reason you do this based on estimates beforehand is to get it all out there get the process done, hear from each other, and to hear from the property owners before spending the money.
Okay. I'm just very concerned. I mean, we've had a track record lately, and it's not any fault of the cities, where we've had substantial cost overruns, just due to, generally even just due to the market. So I do have a little bit of concern about that. But if you feel as though, in your best legal opinion, that this is the right avenue to pursue, then, I will defer to your expertise on that aspect of it.
I would say that it's definitely the more common route taken, for the reasons that I've stated. I don't want to say one way is right or wrong. It's certainly your policy decision, but this is definitely the most common route.
Okay. So then I'll piggyback. Mr. Fortas, what is our time frame for completing this project? Like, what is the full time frame between the assessment and actually doing the project?
I think, given the amount of time left in the assessment process, that this would probably be a spring construction project. But this type of work, weather dependent, could be done in the wintertime. It's a fairly small project, and if we have it really depends on what kind of winter we have. If it's a drier, colder winter, it could probably be completed over winter.
Okay. And Mr. Fordyce, I'll stick with you for a second. So do you have any concerns about the infrastructure in which this drain is going to connect into?
No, I mean, I'm sure there's some, flaws in that storm sewer system, but it could handle this amount of additional flow.
But beyond that, what I'm afraid of is when we go to open up this infrastructure, are you going to realize that it's past its useful life? I mean, do you know where it is in its lifespan?
I mean, all the utilities in that neighborhood are original. So, we're gearing towards that decade where you're going to need water main replacements and pavement replacements. So but this will not accelerate that process. It won't change any of those needed repairs. It's we're just tapping into an existing catch basin, and it won't exacerbate anything any substantial way.
Okay. I'm going to stick with you. I'm nearing the end, I promise. There was made mention about an illegal French drain. Does that impact your project at all? Does it cause more water? I guess I'm just trying to ask, where does that fall in process?
The permissibility of a French drain is usually pretty liberal. Property owners can make improvements on their own properties. Where that discharges might be problematic, and we could take a look at that, but it doesn't really impact this solution. There's been, as we've discussed before, there's been multiple changes in that easement area of landscaping and fences and gardens and various other things, and we're proposing doing it this way so that we don't have to deal with all those things. But this is putting a drain at the new low point and getting the water out of there.
Okay.
And then that drain, I believe the one that Mr. Klasinski referenced, is downstream of this proposed solution.
Okay, because he was implying, I believe, that it was draining down his driveway.
The outlet, yeah, where it outlets, the water flows towards his property.
So, and I apologize because I can't picture the property at this time without seeing it. So would that water then have a way to be diverted to this new drain?
Most of the water that would currently goes through that drain would be intercepted by the new drain.
Okay.
So it wouldn't get to that French drain.
Okay. And then I just want to
Councilmember Dillon.
Oops, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just had one thought I did want to share, going back to your first question to me. an intermediate way of doing this would be to hold off on this until taking construction bids, but then not proceeding with construction until after having confirmed the special assessment role. That still doesn't guarantee you aren't going to have some overruns because, you know, there can be construction contingencies that pop up. But I did want to mention that because that would be an intermediate route. It would put a lot of timing pressure on this special assessment proceeding, though, because once you go out for construction bids, you have a limited time in which to award the contract, and we'd have to fit all of the remaining process. Plus, you'd probably want to wait to see if there were any appeals of the assessment before you awarded the contract. So I'm still not sure that I would go that route, but I did want to get that out there so that you had that to consider.
I appreciate that. And then my last question, Mr. Fordyce, was you mentioned surveying and then some final, I stopped the word final when I was writing my notes, I apologize. There was something else that was going to be done. So that's all professional engineering. Do we outsource that? Is that something you are doing? I think it was fine.
I'm sorry, I had a little noise in the background here. But prior to bidding, getting construction bids for this, yes, we do need to shoot some grades and establish the slope of this pipe and, you know, do final sizing of the structures. So
Okay.
there is some money to be spent before we get to the construction bid phase.
And is that incorporated at this point into this number?
It's in this budget, yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm all set with my question.
Councilwoman Mitchell.
Thank you, Your Honor. I guess where I struggle with this, and I'm addressing council, the city doesn't require a permit before somebody digs a drain. And I just wonder if that's something to consider. I had a really helpful conversation with Mr. Fordyce in which I asked, you know, is it worth looking at drainage when we do issue permits for sheds? Because here's the thing, we said it was okay for those people to build the sheds. And it doesn't feel great that we're saying, okay, because your neighbor built a shed and their neighbor built a shed, now you have to pay, I think it was $500 a year, around $500 a year for 5 years. And I guess, Mr. Fordyce, when I go back to the French drain, I'm not sure what about it is illegal, but I would think that transporting water onto somebody else's property is certainly not okay. Maybe that's the legal part.
That's what I would see is, like I said, where it discharges and that water flows onto the neighboring property fairly directly. That part seems questionable to me.
Right. And, you know, so is that like a code? Would we send our code enforcement person out? Would we send an engineer out to look? How do we fix that?
Generally, those issues, building inspector deals with those in consultation with myself. Often it's done on a complaint basis.
Mm-hmm.
So that could be looked at. When I was out there, you know, the water was not flowing, so it seemed consistent with the way Mr. Klasinski described it. But.
Right. Well, and I'm just thinking about if we're not doing anything till spring, especially having that water, if it comes onto the driveway, you know, the freezing and getting warm and refreezing again, that worries me. And I guess the fact that the water has been progressing every year and it's pretty close to the house. Did you look at the grade of the house? Did you look at, you know, has the house been built up with clay around the foundation?
As I recall it, the grade around the house is fairly flat. It looked I don't know, original. I didn't see any modifications
Right.
to the grade adjacent to the house.
Right. I had a house that same age, and I remember the clay, putting down the clay to increase the grade next to the house. I feel for that owner that nothing's going to be resolved right now. And I think this city, I think it would be good if the city considered the pros and cons of any grading or trench projects. Do we need to permit those? So those are my thoughts for now. Thanks. Thanks.
Mr. Kamara-Sulek, questions?
Yes, just real quickly. Given Mr. Mr. Kleminski's comments about the water getting closer to his foundation and to his basement windows, I think it would be worth looking into doing it sooner rather than later for his benefit. Sounds like it's getting a little too close for comfort. Other than that, my other questions have been answered. Thank you.
Very good. Unless there's something further, we have a motion on the floor simply to acknowledge receipt of the September 2020 memo from Interim Manager Green. So we'll proceed to vote. It's simply to acknowledge receipt. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Ayes have it, and we have acknowledged receipt of the memo. Now we need a motion to approve or not to approve resolution number 2, determination to make public improvements, approval of plans and estimates of costs, filing of special assessment roll, notice of hearing.
Move to approve.
Been moved by CO, seconded by Gearbaugh to approve. Discussion. Mr. CO, anything you'd like to add?
Just that I appreciate what you're saying, Mr. Delorco, about the city having some skin in the game, but ultimately, the city having skin in the game means that all the other taxpayers are involved as well as those who are directly benefited by this. And I guess I would be opposed to that kind of a concept.
Mr. Delorco, anything you'd like to add?
Oh, I certainly appreciate that point of view. When I maintain my views on the city having skin in the game, I'm referring back to how this was originally brought to council and what was originally mentioned to the taxpayers and to the homeowners in this particular situation. And then we're talking about an easement with public utilities, and we've talked about this. We've talked about there being electrical lines. We've talked about there being a public easement, and that involves a public solution. And moreover, we've had a breach of our own ordinances that prohibit people from putting structures and objects that would occlude any kind of drainage requirements, and we've been lax in enforcing those rules. So it's incumbent upon ourselves to contribute to this solution, and if we're not willing to do that, I cannot support this motion.
Thank you. Mr. Gearbaugh, anything you'd like to add?
I believe this is the fairest way we can approach it, and it's the quickest solution for the individual that's being affected by the other properties. If he was to take this in by himself and try to sue the additional individuals, the cost would be so prohibitive for him to solve this problem. And we as a community can provide this service and hopefully resolve it. As to some of those sheds and things built, I don't know if they actually had to have permits pulled, but I do know there were no permits that were needed to do some of the ground and the landscaping and all those other items. So piecemealing back and forth, this is a combined issue. And at this point, when water runoff goes onto another property, it's the responsibility of that other property to resolve it. And for us to have to do this, we have situations where this could be consistent across the entire city. And it's not our fault. It's the homeowners, and their responsibility is to make sure that they did pull permits. And if they didn't, then that's their problem.
Councilman Dillon.
Thank you.
Anything you'd like to add?
I do appreciate the perspectives of both Mr. Delorco and Mr. Gearbaugh. I've struggled with this issue for quite some time. And I do think that Mr. Gearbaugh does have a valid point in that this is going to be the fairest way at this point to reach a conclusion in a timely manner.
Very good. Thank you. Councilwoman Mitchell.
I too agree, Mr. with Mr. Gearbaugh's thoughts, and I appreciate Mr. DeLorco's thoughts. And until we have a way of helping these neighbors control, or if we decide to permit any kind of grading changes, I can see your view, but for now, I think I need to support this motion, so I'll be supporting it.
Thank you, Councilmember Kamara-Sulak.
Thank you. I believe we need to, this is telling us we need to look at permitting, or at least to look back at how this situation started. And so that we don't have this happening to other residents. So moving forward, I agree that this is the best way to move forward and to solve the issue for the homeowners involved. But I really think we need to take a deeper look, so this doesn't happen to other neighborhoods, other homes, especially as they get older, and some of these sheds are built, and people, whether intentionally or unintentionally, cause harm or water runoff to somebody else's property. And so I agree this is the best way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kamara-Sulak. Well, first, and I think I speak for everybody on council, and I have empathy with the gentleman who spoke earlier, because I have water issues at my own house. So, Mr. Fordyce, I guess this comment is directed specifically to you. If there's a way to move this project forward and expedite the construction of this drainage solution sometime later this season or in the winter, I think that would be ideal, and that's what we should strive for. In addition to that, and this will not come as any great surprise to my colleagues, my position on this matter mirrors what was articulated just moments ago by my colleague, Mr. DeLorco. I do believe that it would be prudent and appropriate to have some additional skin in the game in sharing the cost of this improvement, and not place the entire burden on the gentleman who spoke earlier and some of his adjacent property owners. With that, we do have a motion on the floor, moved by Seal, seconded by Gearbaugh, to approve. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Ayes have it, and the motion carries 5-1. Thank you. 5-2, excuse me. We move on to new business item 20-156, change order number 2, final RBC drive replacement. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the September 30th, 2020 memo from wastewater treatment superintendent Wygowski, and to approve or not approve RBC repair change order number 2 in the amount of $6,338. Is there a motion?
Move to approve?
Will you acknowledge first, Councilwoman Dillon?
Yes, I apologize.
Nope, that's fine. Moved by Councilwoman Dillon to acknowledge and to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Seo. Mr. Wygowski, do you care to make a brief comment?
Yes. So the original contract included the shipment of 2 of our damaged gear drives to the manufacturer for inspection and repair at the level 2 cost. This change order is for the shipment of 4 additional damaged units to the manufacturer. It was found that 5 out of the 6 units needed a level 3 repair. So this includes the cost of the shipping and the additional repair of 1 of the units at the level 3 cost.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Wygowski. Mr. Brian Rubel, I saw that you're with us this evening. Welcome. Good evening. Anything that you would like to add?
No, I think Mr. Wygowski said it quite well. I'll be here for questions.
Very good. We'll open it up for questions. Pretty straightforward. Mr. Seo, any questions for Mr. Wygowski or Mr. Rubel?
None, thank you, sir.
Mr. DeLorco?
None, Your Honor.
Mayor Pro Tem Gearbaugh?
Just real quick, going forward, do we anticipate the cost to maintain these significantly less?
The repaired units?
Well, no, as we start going forward and start repairing, are we going to, because I thought we had in the plan that we'll keep doing these 2 a year or so forth?
Well, we have 2 spares on hand in the odor control building. The plan is, as a new unit, as one of our working unit fails, that we'll send that in for replacement, so we always have 1 on the shelf. The problem with having multiple spares on hand is the warranty begins as soon as we receive the unit.
Okay. No, that's fine. I just want to make sure that we've planned ahead for that. Thank you.
Councilwoman Dillon.
No questions.
Thank you. Ms. Mitchell.
Also, no questions. Thank you.
Mr. Kamara Sulak.
I have no questions at this time.
Very good. Then if there's no discussion, we have a motion on the floor moved by Dillon, seconded by CO to acknowledge receipt and to approve. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. We move on to new business item, our last new business item of the evening, 20-157, consent of surety to final payment. This will be a motion to acknowledge receipt of the September 30th, 2020 memo from wastewater treatment superintendent Wygowski and to approve or not to approve the consent of surety to final payment in the amount of $109,951.07. Is there a motion?
What, Your
I'll
Honor,
move to
is the
approve.
consent to surety? We're agreeing to pay?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you want to move that? We really need to follow proper Robert's rules, which we deviate from time to time. Actually, before you discuss anything, you actually have to have a motion on the floor for an enumerated action item. It could simply be to acknowledge receipt, but would you like to acknowledge and to approve?
I would acknowledge and approve.
Very good. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Del Orco. And mind you, too, that just because you move and second a motion doesn't mean you're obligated to vote in the affirmative.
I understand, but I didn't understand exactly what it meant.
Nope. Fair enough. Mr. Wygowski, do you want to begin? And then maybe we'll hear some comments from Mr. Rubel.
Yeah, I guess just briefly, Shouldice Industrial completed the required work. It's been approved by Tetra Tech. We're very happy with their work performance, and that's about it.
Very good. Mr. Rubel, anything you'd like to add?
Steve said it quite well. I will also echo that Shouldice was one of the best contractors that the city of Saline has had at the wastewater plant.
Good. That will be noted and remembered. Mr. Seal, any questions or comments?
I've already asked and was answered.
Very good. Mr. Del Orco?
None.
Mayor Pro Tem Gearbaugh?
Nope. Thanks, Jack, for asking the question. I had my own my own question there.
Councilwoman Dillon?
Can we just back up to that? So what exactly does consent of surety mean?
That was a little bit of a misnomer. Consent of surety is simply the approval by the bondholder, the bond issuer, that all the subs have been paid, and therefore the city of Saline should feel free to issue final payment to the contract.
Okay.
It really is final payment you're approving. I think the consent of surety just got thrown in there perhaps by accident.
Yeah, I guess that was going to be my question. So in the future, Brian, you see no objection if we use language that's a bit more accessible?
Yeah, when the agenda got typed, I think it got thrown in there by accident.
Yeah. Ms. Dillon, anything else?
No, thank you for the clarification.
Councilwoman Mitchell?
Is there any way to fix the language now? Would the original mover object to that?
Mr. Seal, do you see any need to change it or no?
Well, I think now that we all understand what it means, but if it needs to be changed for other council members, I'm happy to do that too.
I think, my colleagues can tell me if they object. I think moving forward, we use more accessible language. I don't see any inherent harm in the way the motion is worded currently.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Councilmember Kamara Sulak.
Just for clarification, Mr. Rubel, this is just, the surety part is just because this is a final payment. Otherwise, if it wasn't a final payment, then we wouldn't be in this, we wouldn't be phrased that way, or we wouldn't need the surety cleared.
That's absolutely correct. Again, I think all you're doing is issuing the final payment. The consent of surety is a prerequisite for us to get to this point.
Okay, good. I just wanted to make sure I understood.
You said it very well.
Great. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Kamara Sulak. If there's no additional discussion, and the chair hears none, it's been properly moved by CO, seconded by Del Orco to acknowledge and to approve. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, say nay. Ayes have it, the motion carries unanimously. Mr. Rubel, thank you very much. Have a good evening. We'll transition now to the discussion portion of our agenda. First up is committee, commission, and task force reports from council members. I'll start with those at the dais. Mr. Seo, anything you'd like to add?
None, Your Honor.
Mr. Delorco.
Over the weekend on the Environmental Commission, we managed to make another run at getting some of those batteries out of DPW. The first phase of that was to get them to the recycle facility, and then there was about half of them left. I was there over the weekend with some other members of the Environmental Commission, and one thing we've confronted, something for us to contemplate moving forward if we reinitiate collecting batteries at City Hall, is that the recycle center requires that all lithium-ion batteries are separated from alkaline battery storage because there's the risk that they could self-ignite. And they don't allow us to distribute them in their mixed form. So it took an inordinate amount of time to go through every bucket of batteries that was down there and find the lithium-ion batteries. So whatever solution we can come up with to encourage our residents to sequester those separately and for us to collect them separately is going to be much appreciated moving forward. Thanks so much.
Very good. Thank you for your work on that, and thank you to the other members of the Environmental Commission. Mr. Gearbaugh, reports or other announcements, and maybe touch briefly on the most recent Planning Commission meeting, if you would.
Yeah, as you had requested. During the last Planning Commission meeting, we approved 2 site plan extensions. One for Fairdene. Normally, we would extend it for 1 year, but because the PUD for Fairdene expires May 30th, I believe, Mr. Green can confirm for me, the resolution for the entire Planning Commission was just to extend it to that point in time so that those end dates are consistent and that we didn't have a planning or a site plan end date that was longer than the PUD. The other one was Lair Farms, and Lair Farms, as their PUD expires in December, this one approved it for another year to October, and that will be fine for them. So those 2 were extended because of the conditions related to pandemic and everything else. So the Planning Commission was fine with moving that forward. And that was it.
Very good. Thank you. Councilwoman Dillon, Commission Committee reports, and I believe you have a very important and timely one.
I do. I have 2 actually. So I'm going to start with one because, and of course you gave. So first I want to just start with the Census Committee and just let everybody know that as of October 1st, Saline has had an 81% response rate, which is really good. But now we really need to turn our attention and focus to that remaining 18%. And I just want to remind people who haven't, and even those who have, why it's so important to complete the census, federal funding allocation, redistricting, and then more locally, it aids in population trends and growth projections, which helps us to be able to plan housing developments, infrastructure, staffing, a lot of different things. So please, if you have not yet completed your census, go to 2020census.gov today and do that. And if you have any questions, it's about a 10-minute process. If you have any questions, do not hesitate to call the City of Saline Clerk's office. Their number is 734-429-4907. So that's for the census. And then I do have one other announcement. For the city manager hiring committee. I wanted to state that on behalf of the hiring committee members, which consists of myself, Council Member Seo, Council Member Camaro Sulak, Police Chief Hart, Washtenaw Road Commission Managing Director Cheryl Siddell, and Chelsea City Manager John Hannafin, and of course our hiring consultant Frank Walsh. We are very excited to bring forth the following candidates for consideration for the city manager position in Saline. They are in no specific order. Village of Dundee Manager David Ewell, City of Fenton Assistant City Manager Michael Hart, City of Durand City Manager Colleen O'Toole, Northville Township Manager Todd Mulcher. And what will be the next step for this process is the City of Saline will host in-person interviews with our candidates on Monday, October 12th. Yes, it is Columbus Day. It is not a holiday celebrated through the city. So city will be open that day. We will be beginning on the hour, beginning at 6 p.m. Individual candidate, questions will be presented to each individual candidate for a period of about 45 minutes. And let's see, I apologize, my pages are sticking together. So as for public engagement, due to COVID and not being able to host an actual public forum, we will be live streaming the interviews via Zoom and Facebook Live. We will also provide an online comment card so that the public can provide comments regarding the candidates. The public will not be allowed to ask questions in real time, and questions received via Zoom and Facebook Live will not be considered. We just need one concise place to have all of the questions and comments. Our plan is that on the night of the interviews, we will not deliberate. The issue will be included on the October 19th City Council agenda. At that time, Council will engage in a conversation toward a formal recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're looking forward to the 12th. And can we make sure, I'm speaking to staff, IT, and city manager, can we make sure to get this information on our Facebook page and website so that people are aware of it? It is just a week away, but we are eager and excited to interview these 4 finalists, and I want to thank the hiring committee for their many hours and your numerous meetings over the past 3-month period. So thank you. Thanks to the consultant as well. Anything further under reports and announcements, Councilwoman Dillon? No? Councilwoman Mitchell?
Thank you, Your Honor. We were to have a walking meeting last week, and it was called off due to bad weather. So we will be having a meeting this week, Wednesday at 7 p.m. for the HDC. Reports or other announcements. I wanted to let...
Well, actually, I'm sorry to interrupt. We're not to reports and other announcements yet. We're still on commission, committee, and task force reports. And I've got to get to Councilmember Camaro Sulek, but I'll come back to you.
Yeah, sure.
Councilmember Camaro Sulek, any other commission, committee, or task force reports?
I do not. I just have one quick thing for the census. Does the city put out reminders to our citizens, or do you cover that on your weekly addresses?
We have put stuff on the website and on Facebook before. We're probably due to do that again. And perhaps I can connect with Councilwoman Dillon. I actually made note of this. Perhaps I can connect with you between now and Wednesday. But if there's some specific things that you'd like me to mention in my weekly PSA about completing the 2020 census, I'd be delighted to do that. So maybe you and I can talk after Wednesday's transition team meeting. And I can also get with you about making sure my messaging is really tight about the city manager search and how people can participate on Monday.
Fantastic, no problem.
Good.
And lastly, I'm really excited about the city manager search, and I think Ms. Dillon has done a fantastic job on keeping it on track, because it's so easy to get derailed and go off in different directions. But I'm amazed at how smooth, relatively speaking, it's gone. And maybe I shouldn't say that because we're not there yet, but I'm really looking forward to Monday.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, let's transition now to reports or other announcements. Mr. Seo, do you have any?
No, sir.
Mr. Delorco?
No, sir.
Mr. Gearbaugh?
None tonight.
Miss Dillon?
No.
Miss Mitchell?
Thank you, Your Honor. I just want to report to council that I received a message from a resident who really wiped out badly because of a rough sidewalk in front of Curtis Bluffs. It sounded like her soul left her body for a little while. And I just wanted to check on that issue with with the code, what is the process where we make sure that sidewalks are in good shape? What should a resident do if that happens?
I believe I also communicated with the resident and followed up with an email earlier today. So the sidewalk square in question, I haven't been on site, but my hunches from the pictures that were provided is the long-term solution is that that sidewalk square will need to be removed and replaced as part of our comprehensive sidewalk initiative. But in the interim, either a cold patch or ideally a hot patch would be placed on that square and on the adjacent square to mitigate and remove the trip hazard, the vertical separation.
Sure. Okay, that sounds good. That's all I had. Thank you.
Mr. Kamara-Sulek, any additional reports or announcements?
Nothing additional tonight, thank you.
Very good. Mr. Wygowski, can we transition to you about wastewater treatment? It appears as though equipment is working properly at the plant. I would like to do a little bit of messaging, and I already spoke to IT about this regarding water quality, because we did get some complaints today, but a comprehensive flushing citywide is forthcoming, which should resolve many of resolve cloudy and should resolve cloudy water and reduce the number of complaints that we received. I know that's more of a distribution issue, not under your purview, but perhaps you can address that as well.
Yeah, so I received several complaints this afternoon. So quite a few valves were closed in anticipation of tonight's flushing. And, the water tended to flow in different directions than it normally does and was quite stirred up this afternoon. So DPW is starting flushing, I believe, at midnight tonight. They'll continue for maybe up to 2 weeks during the night shift. And hopefully that'll take care of the turbid water that we've had.
And any comments about the wastewater treatment plant?
Yeah, so the wastewater treatment plant, all equipment is in operation. We are meeting our permit. All equipment process-wise, the bioscrubber is not operating at full speed. I have it operating as fast as it can without causing a vibration. So with Dickinson Wright and Tetra Tech, we're trying to work with E&L to get the fan base grouted so we don't have the vibration. But I can't run it any faster without taking the chance of damaging the equipment. So we're trying to expedite that process, and we'll get her up and running as soon as we can.
Very good. And have we reached out yet to try and schedule a on-site visit from our friends at Webster Environmental?
No, it was decided that we would want to make sure the bioscrubber is running, and obviously we have all the equipment running. We want to have the bioscrubber running so they can assess any alternative sources at the site.
And when do you think that the bioscrubber issue will be resolved?
We're waiting on E&L. So
Okay.
I know Mr. Wood sent a letter to them today, so hopefully they'll respond quickly.
Very good. Questions? Mr. Seo, any questions for Mr. Wygowski?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Delorco?
I actually do not. I'm relieved to see that the flushing is moving forward. So thanks to Steve, Jeff, and all of DPW on getting that taken care of. Hopefully that'll resolve a lot of our issues. And I want to applaud you for sending out the samples from the filters, the iron removal filters for commercial laboratory analysis. I appreciate that very much, Mr. Wiskowski.
Thank you, Mr. Delorco. Mayor Pro Tem Gearbaugh, any questions or comments?
Yeah, just quick. Yes, I experienced rusty water today too, and I think the change of the flow probably is something we haven't done in a long while. So that hits all of town, and recognize that you're trying to get this to flush out as much rust as we can. So appreciate what you're doing. I do have one question. When you mentioned you're sending a letter from Rock to what's the name of the company?
E&L.
E&L. Are we at that point again? Now we're having to get into a warranty fight?
We're under negotiation. We're still withholding money from E&L, so we're still under negotiation for them to resolve the grouting issue.
Okay. My only concern, and I know you're moving forward on this, but if E&L isn't going to fix it, then we need to hire somebody else, and we'll figure out how we resolve that afterwards. I don't want to see this go much longer than we have to.
Yeah, agreed.
That was my idea to have somebody else fix it right away, but we are getting into warranty issues if we have that done, supposedly.
Okay. But that might be, we need to talk with Rock about that, because I don't want to let this go beyond any more time period than we have to.
Correct.
Thank you, Mr. Gearbaugh. Councilwoman Dillon, any questions or comments?
Thank you. I know that the brown water issue had come up today on social media a few times. Thank you for addressing that. I'm happy to see that to read rather, that the Nova filters are working. And have you been able to install the screens on those that you had mentioned?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Fantastic. And then my last question for you is regarding the bioscrubber. What percentage would you say is operational? Is it working at 25%, 60%?
It's hard to say. The pH is not lowered properly, but I think what's happening is it's running at 31 hertz and it should be at about 33 hertz. I'm not sure what the difference is there. That's cycles per second. But once it's running at full speed, we'll be able to bring the pH down better, and then that should resolve the issue. It should get the air dispersed up into a higher plane also, as opposed to down toward ground level more. We have had the odor logger at the fence line for a while now. It's reading very low, but I believe the odor bioscrubber is emitting that farther up, and people are smelling it more on the South Ann Arbor, Willis Road area, perhaps.
That's what I wanted to make mention of. I know that the other day there was a very distinct odor at the Willis Road area. And it seems as though the odors have been fairly consistent lately in areas, especially over by Monroe Street, by the cemetery. And so I guess I'm just very concerned about it being ongoing. I agree with what Mr. Gearbaugh has said about trying to contact another company to possibly do the repairs. So I think that is a discussion that we should be having with our legal counsel as to how we can move forward. I don't want to be held captive by E&L and live through months and months of odor because it's not being repaired.
Thank you, Councilwoman Dillon. Anything else?
No, thank you.
Ms. Mitchell, any questions or comments?
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you, Mr. Wagowski. I read your memo carefully that you included in the packet, and I could not agree more that we need to move more quickly. You just have to be supported with better equipment. I would like to talk with the rest of council and get their thoughts on using a different contractor. We've been working with the same company for a while. I think it's a good idea to get a fresh perspective and perhaps a competitive bid. So I don't know what needs to happen, Your Honor, to have that come forward with the, let's see, let me read it so people at home know. It's a biosolid study. And we need that for our AOC. Is that right, Your Honor?
A biosolids, excuse me, restate the question.
Sure. So we need, ACO. We need to, so I guess it's Mr. Green's memo. He talks about, with council's blessing, we would like to work on getting an official proposal to conduct a biosolid study at our plant. So I guess that's a question for Mr. Green. Mr. Green, so is this to help us comply with our ACO?
No, this is for the siting study that we've had for about a year. We just kind of want to keep it moving forward. And one of the recommendations in the siting study was to do a biosolid study, as that will help identify what phases we need to, what aspects of the phases we need to do first.
And we are revisiting the siting study issue in the future of wastewater services at our next meeting, at a work meeting at 6 p.m.
Right. So one of the things I wanted to mention, Mr. Green, is that some of the difficulty is not knowing what external pressure is going to be on the market. So we're learning about PFAS. It could be that we're not able to handle sludge the way we used to. So will there be a couple of different options? Will we have flexibility, or are you looking for flexibility for whatever way we're looking at biosolids, whatever solution?
Well, that's what the proposal and hopefully the study will identify is what makes up our solids and what we can and cannot do with them with our plant. So that's a big push for that.
Okay, all right, so we're going to discuss that next week at 6.
Well, if you guys, that's why it's a separate memo than Steve's. If you guys give me the okay, I can potentially come back with a proposal at your guys' next meeting. That's why, but Tetra Tech doesn't want to waste the time and manpower to put together a proposal if we're not ready to move forward with an aspect of the project.
So I'm really sorry, I would have expected that to be an agenda item.
But that's why it's just discussion. If you guys come with consensus that you want to seek proposals, I'll go do that. But some organizations don't want to put together proposals if you guys aren't ready to even consider them.
I see. Okay. So you need input from council tonight.
Yeah, if you guys say, okay, go get a proposal, I can go get those.
Yeah, well, let me ask this question because I would hope there would be no objection because agreeing to allow Mr. Green to solicit proposals does not guarantee that you would vote in the affirmative when it's an enumerated action item. But I think this analysis is imperative and timely, and so I have no objections to you moving forward and accepting bids and then coming back with a formal proposal for us to consider. Is there any objection from the dais on that? No? Any objection from those participating remotely?
I would just say run, do not walk. Let's go.
Mike, well, if I could.
Go ahead, Mayor Pro Tem Gearbaugh, and then I'll jump back to Councilwoman Dillon, but I do want to try and wrap this up because I still have to get to Councilmember Kamara Sulak, who hasn't asked any questions. So, Dean, go ahead.
Mike, can you clarify when you said you were concerned you wouldn't get proposals or responses back? Because
there's just some groups that don't want to put proposals together if there's no chance council is going to consider them. So if I brought to you guys just randomly threw proposals on the agenda and everyone was like, what is this? Then we set everything back another month.
So you're randomly just going to go out and put a RFI out there and get some information?
Yeah, I didn't want to do that.
Okay.
Yep.
You want to do the full thing. Got it.
Councilwoman Dillon?
Thank you. I just want clarification. So are we soliciting Tetra Tech to do the biosolid study, or are you going to RFP on Tetra Tech's recommendation?
Tetra Tech would be ready to submit a proposal to do this project if you guys are okay with that. If you want me to go RFP it, we can. It's just going to probably take longer.
I was just looking for clarification.
Yeah, my recommendation would be use Tetra Tech as they've done the siting study, so they could easily knock this out. And then for timing wise, we could get moving much faster versus putting an RFP out, reviewing bids, then bringing it to you.
That's totally understandable. That's fine. I just was looking for that clarification so I knew what to expect at the next meeting.
Thank you, Councilwoman Dillon. Back to Ms. Mitchell before I transition to Mr. Kamara Sulak. You might be muted, Kristen.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I guess my only statement to council is at what point are we seeing diminishing returns? And I think it's just a good idea to have bids. I know it takes longer. I think it's the right thing to do. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Kamara Sulak. Questions or comments regarding Mr. Wygowski's report?
Well, I concur with Ms. Dillon and Mr. Gerbach about we need to get the odor problems figured out and not be held captive. And then I do have a question for Mr. Green. Where are we with the fence for the adjacent property owners for the wastewater treatment plant?
Yeah, we've brought this to council a few times, and each time we aren't given really clear direction where you want to go. We've sent letters out to property owners. Only one has requested it, and that's Ms. Umbrewster. Other than that, everyone else would rather see wastewater treatment plant money be put into a plant versus a fence. A lot of people that come back to us enjoy just the natural vegetation that's there more than anything. Mm-hmm. So maybe maintaining that better would be a priority, but putting an entire fence in didn't seem like it was anyone's that didn't seem like anyone wanted that besides one property owner.
Okay, so what does that mean then? That one property owner's needs and wants are not important, or do we
Well,
do we need to vote on what we do with the whole fence situation that we've kind of talked on and off about? I don't think we've talked about it for a month, so I'm just trying to get back up to speed on where we're at.
Yeah, from staff's perspective, it's completely up to council. We can still bid this out and go forward with it. We've reached out to everyone. We've gotten normal quotes, but it'd be something we'd have to go re-quote again for one specific person. If you guys want to move forward with that.
I thought part of the process was if we were going to put up a fence for Miss Armbruster, that we would have to extend the same to the other property owners. And since we're not incurring that additional cost. So I think we need to talk about, are we going to move forward with a fence for her property, especially since she's the most impacted both by the view and by the odor. Obviously, the fence isn't going to impact the odor, although maybe slightly depending upon the wind. But that's what I recall of where we started.
Any additional questions for Mr. Wygowski or Mr. Green regarding their reports, Mr. Kamara-Sulak?
No, I think at the next meeting, we should make a decision whether we're going to do the fence or we're not.
Very good. Make note of that, and I'll make sure that that's discussed at our next meeting in 2 weeks. If there's nothing further on the wastewater treatment plant, let's transition to a quick update on downtown street closures. Mr. Green, have you received any additional feedback in the 2 weeks since we last met?
Not too much, especially regarding the extension that was granted. The only biggest thing is we got a little feedback from some of the businesses downtown. This last week was slow, naturally due to weather for them since it rained. They didn't mention the cold; it was mostly due to rain. So we'll keep monitoring it over the next couple of weeks and hope for a little better weather for them.
Very good. Not seeing any questions or comments, so we'll transition to. I'm sorry. Who wanted to chat or who wanted to talk?
Hey, just real quick.
Yeah, please.
Mike, is there any concern with the heaters that are on the sidewalk?
On the sidewalks, we've talked about it in the building department real quick. No, not really. We'll run it by fire chief again, but as long as it keeps that ADA path, as of right now, we're okay with it. We just don't want them in the street, just in case we do need to get an emergency vehicle down there.
Okay, just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Very good. And our last item of the evening is Henry Street traffic calming and South Ann Arbor intersection site distance improvements. I think the two issues that we needed to revisit was vegetation and trees, what's being preserved and what's being removed. And then I think there was also some folks who wanted to comment a little bit further on, perhaps making that a four-way stop. Who would like to begin this evening? Mr. Gearbaugh, Mayor Pro Tem Gearbaugh, can I start with you? Any thoughts on this?
Ms. Dillon still had a question on the last issue. I don't want to interrupt.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll jump back to her real quick. Councilman Dillon, a question about downtown street closures.
I do very quickly, Mr. Green, is there any impact right now from the Supreme Court decision? Will the recovery zones be changed? Is that something we have to look at?
It's something we'll monitor. We naturally, Dickinson Wright's been tracking this like crazy, especially today, and so have we. They don't recommend changing anything right now. So until I get more information from them, I'm just going to stick with the status quo.
Okay. And I would like, if you're going to be providing updates to us, that we get some stats with it as to whether those spaces are actually being utilized. I know weather is a condition, but that's going to be a condition going forward. I would like to closely monitor the use of that, because that was one of the things that we did discuss, that if it wasn't going to be used to its full potential, that we would consider, ending the program. Yep. So I do want to make sure that we are receiving data from those businesses.
Yep, I'm trying. For example, Smokehouse, 32% of their business was outside last week, and that's mostly due to weather. But so I do get it from some of them. It's just trying to pull it from the rest of them.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, our final item of the evening is Henry Street traffic calming in the intersection at South Ann Arbor. Mr. Gearbaugh, you have any additional thoughts you'd like to add?
Yeah, I'm fine with moving ahead with it. I would like to see that the trees, that's not an issue for me. Whatever is the best thing we need to do. We can always plant a tree farther down and address that differently if we have to. I'm more concerned about clarity and the ability to not be able to see appropriately when they go through the intersection. The other thing, though, I would like to see a four-way stop sign at that intersection. I want that as a solution at this point in time.
Okay,
We can do
very-
that as a council.
Very good. Ms. Dillon?
Thank you. I concur with Mr. Gearbaugh about the four-way stop sign. I think that should be a non-negotiable for us at this point. Mr. Fordyce, one of the things that I think we started to address and didn't quite get there was the side streets and whether we were going to be striping them as part of these projects. I would like better clarification as to whether or not that is something we're going to proceed on.
I have not looked at the side streets, such as like Mark Hanna. There are, just like everything on the roadway, there are warrants. Even for a center line, there are warrants for that. And quite sure, given the amount of traffic there, that Mark Hanna would not meet the warrants for a center line.
Oh, I apologize. I was not implying that by any means. I just want to make sure that in areas where there is designated parking, Harris Street comes to mind as well as Lewis. I think that there should be opportunities maybe to stripe for parking.
Right. I'll go back and look at what the parking study recommended in that. I think you are correct that it did recommend South Lewis and South Harris as well. So we could include that.
Okay. The other thing that I had recommended, and at one point, I believe during the transition team meeting, was possibly doing a council field trip. If people feel like they still have some sight line issues. I know when we did that for Curtis Bluffs, the Monroe Street thing, it was extremely helpful to sort of see it in real life and understand what we were talking about. If people are fine with the way that the proposals are, then that's fine. If there are concerns, just making sure that we're all on the same page.
Okay, thank you. Councilwoman Mitchell? Are you there? We'll come back to her. Councilmember Kamara Sulak.
Yes, I feel very strongly for a four-way stop at the intersection there. And if there is anything that we can do to save that one tree that we discussed, or plan a similar size one there would work as well.
Very good. I also would like to see a four-way stop, and I'm willing to rely on the judgment and perspective of the experts in regards to the trees and vegetation. And if council members would like to meet with staff at that intersection to evaluate it further, I would encourage you to reach out to Mr. Green, and that can be arranged. Mr. CEO, anything else you'd like to add?
Yes, Your Honor. I guess I'll be the lone voice, but I think to put a four-way stop there without it being warranted from the Uniform Code of Traffic Control Devices invites liability for the city, and I'd hate to see that happen if there is a crash there at that intersection and some serious injury.
Very good. And Mr. Del Orco.
I also support the four-way stop. I think if anything, it'll make that intersection safer as opposed to more dangerous. And the purpose of that is also twofold. If we put the four-way stop sign at that location, then the sight lines become less of a concern. And we can remove the one tree that's half dead. And Mr. Fordyce made it pretty clear that you could still see on either side of the one very tall, mature tree that's there. If we take the first one down, and it's not as simple as replanting a tree that's that mature and that big. If you remove that tree, the more conservative approach would be to not remove the tree and see if the sight distance lines are made safer, and that if we have a four-way stop there, that there's a less of a concern for confusion on behalf of the drivers. That's the main point for me in advocating for a four-way stop. It's just confusing. Some people that are not native to Saline come to that intersection and don't know what to do. And they're simply stalled and confused, and it's just never worked very well. So I don't know why the study did not recommend or didn't warrant the need for a four-way stop there, but perhaps that needs to be looked at as well. But that's all.
Very good. I think we have consensus. Was Councilwoman Mitchell able to rejoin us or rejoin the meeting?
Yeah. Thank you, Your Honor. I'm sorry, I had something fall. I agree that we need to do a stop sign. I think there are some issues that local government just can handle better than the state. And I would like to hear more about the liability issues, but it's just worth pursuing at this point. We've had a lot of feedback that that's helped. Thank you.
Okay, I believe you have consensus, or we have consensus, and staff should have direction on this. Thank you, gentlemen and ladies. If there's nothing further to be discussed under the discussion portion of tonight's meeting, we come to the second public comment period. Under the Open Meetings Act, any citizen may come forward at this time, make comment or question to City Council. This public comment period will be limited to 3 minutes per person. Anyone who would like to speak is requested but not required to state his or her name and address for the record. Please. We'll start with those in council chambers. So before I yield the floor to Mrs. Hess, if there are people who are participating remotely and you'd like to make a comment or question, please type it under the chat icon at the bottom of your screen, and please indicate that you would like your comments read as part of the record. Mrs. Hess, you may begin when ready.
Thank you. I noticed there was a lot of discussion on ordinance 819 and 820 I believe in the 50s, and I know in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, while I was on city council, we would have a first reading because it does impact the public. And after the first reading, it would go for the public to read, and then the council would do a second reading and possibly adopt. But they didn't normally adopt it on a first reading, or as they have done tonight. The other comments is Addian property, which is the old Universal plant. I'm so disappointed that Jay wasn't able to speak, but the attorney talked as far as what was going on. As far as the Celine Lodging Group or the hotel, from what I heard from Mr. Long, is that it appears the cart was put before the horse in financing and in planning. And I'm just an old widow woman, poor, and I see we're talking about 4.5 million, 9.5 million, and there was a 15 million thrown in too. And I would hope that they put $500 down, I understand, on close to a $50,000 tax bill. I would hope they would not come later and ask for their first approval of having their taxes forgiven or the penalty forgiven. And as far as in general, I guess I would feel, Mrs. Lincoln, other than that, how'd you like the play?
Thank you, Mrs. Hess. Clerk Royal, are there comments that were submitted either via email or submitted via the chat icon on Zoom this evening?
No, sir.
Okay. One last opportunity if you'd like to type in a question or comment. Well, we appreciate everyone's participation this evening. Please note our upcoming meetings, including a special meeting next Monday to review applicants for the vacant city manager position. There'll be more shared on social media and on the web, and I'll message on this in my weekly PSA. And then our next regular meeting is on the 19th with a siting study meeting at 6 p.m., regular council meeting at 7. At this time, the chair would entertain a motion to adjourn at 10:40 p.m.
So moved.
Moved by Mitchell. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Kamara Sulak. All those in favor of adjourning say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Ayes have it. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.